It's just 4 minutes after 1. I'd like to invite the clerk to conduct the roll call.
Supervisor Hashak.
Here.
Chair Jurdy.
Here.
Supervisor Williams.
Here.
Supervisor McGordy.
Here.
And Supervisor Mulhern.
Here.
Okay, right. I'm not sure who's in the chambers, but if someone there could lead us in the pledge, that'd be great.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you. So next on the agenda is public expression. Do we have any telecomments or members of the public wishing to comment on non-agenda items?
Yes, we do. First on the line is going to be Trey Strickland. Trey, you'll want to click *6 to unmute yourself.
All right. Are we unmuted?
Oh, we have to mute ours. Sorry.
There's a lot of feedback. If you could reduce the volume on whatever you're watching the meeting on, that would be good.
Is that better? Can you hear us?
Yes.
Yeah. All right, and I think we're on video too. Can you see us as well? I have Marlena Dooley here with me.
Well, I guess we could just proceed with audio.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't look like Marlena is connected anymore.
I'm here.
Yeah, for video.
Okay. Yeah. So Marlena is here with me. We're in our conference room, and we don't see ourselves up there, so we can't really see what the view is. But I have Marlena here with me.
Can you just proceed with an audio comment?
Well, absolutely. I was asked by Darcy for us to be on the call to basically give an update on where we are with the building permits for hoop houses, and had conversations with county council, and plus we've been coordinating with planning and building as well. Met with them the Friday before last to discuss these issues, and we received county council's opinion. So we've already started the process to assign and review the hoop house permits, for lack of a better term, that we had on hold. And we still want to continue the conversations with planning and building and the cannabis unit and county council to make sure we have the process dialed in. And we wanted to discuss a couple issues with the process that we'd like to see addressed to help make it more efficient. And Marlena is our subject matter expert for all things cannabis. So Marlena, is there anything that I've left out or that you'd like to add?
No, I think you summed it up nicely. I'm certainly available to answer any specific questions if there are any from the board.
Okay, Supervisor Mulhern, then Supervisor Hashak.
Thank you. Thanks, guys, for being on the call. I'm wondering how long it's going to take to be caught up. How far behind are we? And I'm assuming, and I don't want to just assume, that as you mentioned, the process will now move forward. And I'm wondering if the questions that you have outstanding are something that the board needs to address, or if you're going to be able to handle that in-house with county council.
Thank you, Marlena Dooley. First question, we met with Planning and Building the Friday before last and came up with a plan that addressed some of our issues. We received a list of building permits from them last Friday. It involves 36 sites that total approximately 214 hoop house applications. I foresee now having some clarity, being able to review those by the end of this week. That being said, our main questions stem around how to process hoop house applications for sites that are not participating in phase 1 that currently have active cannabis farms on them, and how we are going to review well applications, building permit applications, and septic applications that we have for cannabis related sites that are not in the process. Those are our main questions.
Okay. Supervisor Hashak, then Supervisor McGordy.
Thank you, Chair Judy. So thank you, Marlena and Trey, for being on the call. And so to be clear, that anyone who was in the 10A17 program who was trying to get a permit finished for a hoop house or anything for their permit, those should be going through, no problem.
That is correct.
With the normal review and everything. Okay, so
yes.
The issue is these new ones that we assume are going to be in the 2218 program that are already building out and already have cannabis in them and drilling wells and all those kind of things.
Yes.
Okay, so it sounds like the board needs to do policy if we're going to remedy this, because I think that the board's goal was to not have this build out before the permits were issued under the land use process.
Yes, and we are waiting clarification from County Council as to whether or not a well application constitutes an expansion as well.
Okay, thank you.
Supervisor McGordy.
So if my understanding from our various discussions is that moving forward, we're really want to discourage hoop houses on any new applications in most situations. So I certainly don't support any more. I really want to minimize the amount of things that are under plastic, and I only support expansion with sun-grown cannabis. I feel like this hasn't been decided completely, which is why we still want to have some discussions on 1822, assuming it goes forward.
Thank you. Supervisor Williams.
Yeah, question for County Council. If 2218 is not successful, if there's, say, a referendum and we fall back to 10A17, do we have an equal protection concern about only allowing hoop houses for a certain class of people?
Thank you. So if I answer to the chair, there are potentially some issues there. I would say that one of the things that's going to happen is that if the current ordinance fails and we're back on the prior ordinance, we're going to have to look at the end of the moratorium on phase 3 and the possibility that that portion will go forward. So we could present more analysis at that time.
Maybe a follow-up question. I have concern. are you able to tell us that that it isn't a problem, or can you give maybe a little bit more detail on how much of a concern it is?
So I might refer back to the board had shared actually publicly an opinion that I had issued with respect to this item. I forget which meeting it was, but during one of the earlier considerations of the ordinance. There's a real potential issue. The equal protection concerns are going to depend essentially on how things break down. So we're going to have to look at what's the difference between the old or the legacy cultivators and the new cultivators beyond just the question of grandfathering. Essentially, what have they been entitled to do, et cetera. That being said, I do want to say, Mr. Chair, I think we're getting into a little bit too much discussion for something that's off agenda at the moment.
That was going to be my next question. So this sounds like an issue that needs more follow-up. We've had some discussion related to this in the past, and I appreciate environmental health calling in. Do you see an agenda item coming forward in the next 3 to 4 weeks that allows the board to dive into this a little deeper?
To answer your question, Mr. Chair, I think that I need to work with the department, get a little bit more information before I know exactly what would be coming forward. I think there's a few cannabis things in the works that may be coming forward over the next few months that may be appropriate to sort of tack this on to the discussion of. However, with respect to the current issue and the permits and sort of the both Supervisor Williams' concerns on the equal protection and the concerns as to what exactly is going to be happening with the current permits, I think I need a little bit more information before I can say definitively, what item this might be coming forward on.
Okay, but I think just summarize on behalf of the board, I think the board wants further deliberations and discussion on this item at the earliest possible point. But not clear on which agenda item this will get tacked onto, but sure it will be as soon as possible. So do we have any other public comment on non-agenda items?
Yes, we do. We have 3. First one will be Scott Ward, followed by Ron Edwards and Monique Ramirez. Oh, where'd it go? Where'd it go? Okay. You can begin speaking, Mr. Ward. You need to press *6 to unmute.
If Mr. Ward's not available right now, maybe you could circle back to him.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hello? Great. Scott Ward, Redwood Valley. Thank you for the opportunity. I agree this should be an agenda item. My interest in building inspector, code enforcement officer, and plan checker, 13 years with Mendocino County. I'm very familiar with the ministerial permit process, of which a building permit is, as is most material. That means that you can't have any personal or concerns regarding it's a box check. You follow through and meet our ag exempt permits. I've been told by 2 different staff members that Environmental Health, was holding up review of cannabis-related building permits as a class because they may or may not be approved under phase 3. That doesn't matter. It's a ministerial permit. It's illegal for them to withhold them. The majority of the ag exempt permits in the process are for phase 1, people trying to comply. The few that are for phase 3 are speculative development, and people take that risk. That is no reason for someone to interject their personal opinion or fear that someone will waste their money on a project that can't be approved in phase 3. That's up to the applicant and his business plan and judgment. I was fortunate enough to speak with County Council Curtis last Friday, who said it was the first he heard of this issue. I spoke with Nash Gonzalez, who advised me that he did tell Trey and Marlena that they were ministerial permits and they could not be held. Trey and Marlena called me today, and one of the reasons they told me was we couldn't review the permits because we're waiting for an interpretation from County Council. Well, when I talked to Curtis on Friday, it was the first he heard of it. So how could they be waiting for an interpretation? I was told that they're waiting to talk to planning and building about this issue. However, as I previously said, planning and building said they'd already to the department and they couldn't do this. They also told me that the applicant couldn't review the permits because the applicant was in code enforcement. Many times applicants are red tagged and told to go get building permits, and they are in code enforcement. So I'm concerned that the management of environmental health, who issues ministerial permits such as well and septic, don't know enough about the process and the lease of such to withhold review of those permits until another stakeholder. In my opinion, it's shameful that when members of your board say the applicants are the problem from their applications and not doing the right thing, yet we have a county department, again, illegally withholding application review. And I look forward to participating in the discussion of the agenda item. Thank you.
Next on the line will be Ron Edwards, followed by Monique Ramirez.
Good afternoon, board. I feel it was very unfortunate that we didn't hear the very beginning of Scott Ward's presentation, and part of it was cut out. I am also concerned about this issue, and I think that part of the problem is it's being looked at as that, okay, these people are all going to follow the rules and go straight down the line. So in this particular situation, it's not just hoop houses, it's all building permits. So if I were to come into the county and say, hey, I just want to put up this building and not say it's for cannabis, then I would not have been held up by this. So once again, the term cannabis attached to anything automatically slows it down. And throughout this, I keep hearing the board and wanting to see more normality of it. And I think that Supervisor McGurty, his head must be spinning to see how much more complicated this is with cannabis. And there needs to be some mechanism. Please come up with something so that these applications go through as a normal application. And once again, environmental health said if it's a well for cannabis, if it's a hoop house for cannabis, but again, if there's no cannabis mentioned, those projects can move forward. And as Scott Ward says, that's the risk that money's willing to take. And it shows that taking that risk would have paid off in this situation. So I also wanted to thank Supervisor McGordy for attending the Redwood MAC meeting. It was an extremely informative conversation. And it gives me hope that this board will work with the community and hear the concerns that people have. Thank you very much.
Next on the line will be Monique Ramirez.
Hello, Monique Ramirez, speaking on myself. So last week, I was looking at my status on my immature hoop house for my plants, and I realized that the county had put it under environmental health for the 4th review, because there's 5 reviews total, and it stated that it had not been assigned to a reviewer, and it had been 3.5 weeks that it had been sitting in that status. So I contacted the county last week and I spoke to someone in environmental health, and they stated to me that they were directed by someone above them that they would not be issuing any more building permits that were related to cannabis until the new ordinance was finalized. And I freaked out about that because that is honestly a bunch of crap. I am so sick and tired of this program and its negligence and incompetence for this to just be managed properly. I'm so over it. I did a public records request act to find out the email that the staff stated was given to them for this direction. And I got a response very quickly from Adrienne Thompson from PBS stating that there was no holdup with building permits, but I should check with environmental health, which is a clue that they did know about this issue. And if somebody's in 10A17 like myself, and I'm just actually improving my immature plant area to create a hoop house for it, I am not looking to go into 22.18. And we know that the referendum might be moving forward and putting this down to the ballot for the voters. So what, we're going to just hold everyone up until that process? Like, we are running out of time. I am tired of being patient. I am tired of being polite. I am tired of reading poetry, singing songs, like trying in every single way to get your attention. Like, it's over. Like, there is going to be a lawsuit now because farmers are fed up. Like, we're so fed up. I'm fed up. I'm fed up in my advocacy efforts. I'm fed up as a personal cultivator in this program. I'm tired of the rhetoric saying that we're not going to make it. No, Mendocino County isn't going to make it because our government is lacking in leadership, in the biggest way possible. And no fault of your own for many of you, because I applaud you for even stepping into that role. Having leadership, skills is not easy. And so I applaud you for trying, but we have to do better. And I applaud Supervisor Hashuk for trying to get to the bottom of this quickly. Thank you for bringing this forward during the opening of this meeting, but there is more to be discussed. And I would greatly appreciate this being agendized so we could dive deeper and to figure out why there's always these blockages. It's not right. It's a ministerial process, and nothing in the ordinance should be inhibiting people from getting their hoop house permits when 22.18 is another ordinance completely separate from this. Thank you so much.
And that concludes public comment.
Okay, thanks. Supervisor Williams.
Is it possible to hear from environmental health on how we can resolve this today? I don't know the full background, but I agree with the ward concern that ministerial permits should not be held up.
So I'm not sure if environmental health is still on the call or not.
Yes, he's still on the line. Trey, you'll need to click *6 to unmute yourself.
Oh, sorry about that. Can you hear us now?
Can you hear us?
Yeah,
Yes.
go ahead. And I just want to remind everybody that County Council advised that we are kind of at our limits in terms of board discussion, but go ahead and add anything you want.
I would say that in the last 3 weeks, staff has come up with a plan that is in process, and it will be moving forward so that we do not have a backlog like this again. And in a perfect scenario, we would have our cannabis planners vetting these applications before EH or planning, so that we are not trying to interpret an ordinance that's not ours to interpret, strictly speaking. And I mean 1017 by that.
Supervisor Williams?
Yes, so I know we can't get into discussion. Can we ask staff whether we need to agendize this? Maybe it's an off agenda item tomorrow, or is there a way for staff to resolve it quickly?
I think if we have clarity from County Council today, that would provide the clarity that's needed. I think a lot of that has come in the last week, and I would say that a few more details from County Council would address most of our concerns.
So County Council, do you need the board to take it up, or can you take ownership and resolve it?
So if I may respond through the chair, I believe the department has already started processing the ministerial permits in question, and I understand they have some other concerns. I'm happy to advise them and to assist in terms of determining exactly what those are and what the best path forward is. In terms of the board taking it up, I don't know that there's any need for immediate action, although I defer to the department on that. If the board would like a more detailed review, we could certainly do that at the next available meeting.
Yeah, I think we can resolve it just fine working with county council.
Okay, all right, thanks for that. And if something does need to come back to the board, we'll work to get it on the agenda as soon as possible. Right now, on to our agendized item, we have next is item 6A, which is discussion and possible action, including acceptance of update from Cannabis Program on cannabis water use. And the sponsors of this is the Cannabis Program, as well as supervisors, I think maybe both McGordy and Hashak.
Hello, this is Kristen Everall, Cannabis Program Manager. I apologize. I missed part of the introduction to this item as I joined the meeting, so I got bounced off and back on. So I'm not sure if you're waiting for me to respond or if we're waiting for our presenters from UC Berkeley to join.
Well, we really haven't had an introduction yet. So if someone would like to introduce the item as they log in, that's fine.
This is Atlas Pearson, Deputy Clerk of the Board. Clerk of the Board staff were never notified that presenters from UC Berkeley would be calling in. Do we have the names or contact information for those people?
Yes, we do. You would be looking for, the first name is Van Bootsik. Let me pull up the email. I can forward the email to you if that would be helpful. Look at the board.
We found Van Bootsik.
Hi, I think I just got let in.
Yes, you were in the meeting.
All right, perfect, great. I was on the outside looking in, but thank you for letting me in.
And then Van, is Chris there with you? I believe he's the other presenter, or
Chris Dillis is the other presenter. So you can see if he's on. If he's not, I can present his part to it. Oh, there he comes.
Okay, thank you.
Should I share my screen? We have slides, or that feasible?
Go ahead, and if you have not already, be sure to send a copy to the clerk of the board so they can update or upload it to the website.
We did send that, and it has been uploaded to the website.
All right, thanks.
Okay, so let me. This is always the challenge. Then you have 3 screens up, and you try to share your screen well. Zoom, and it always works that Zoom is the one that gets covered, so you can't tell what you're actually doing. All right. So, can you all see the slides?
Yes.
Okay, so thanks for the invitation. Chris and I were asked to speak today on some water use issues surrounding cannabis. And so I'm going to start out asking answering some specific questions that we were requested to answer regarding water and cannabis, specifically quantifying sort of the use of water and cannabis growth. And then Chris is going to give a little bit of an expansion on some of the other issues around water use and cannabis. So a quick introduction. The Berkeley Cannabis Research Center promotes interdisciplinary scholarship on the social and environmental dimensions of cannabis. We're interested in scientific research, but also public outreach and engagement like we're doing here today. I would encourage anybody who's out there to check out our website for our peer-reviewed publications, and you can find basically everything that we're going to show today. You can find the peer-reviewed publications that back it up on our website, crc.berkeley.edu. And our vision is really about having a cannabis agriculture that works both for people and for nature. which, as anybody involved in agriculture knows, is a tricky thing to do for any type of agriculture, not just cannabis. Okay, so I want to start with a little bit of confusion that I found in my career. I've been researching cannabis now for 7 years around cannabis and water. And part of this comes from the ways the regulation and the ways cannabis growing has changed over the last 10 years or so. So for a long time, cannabis was sort of regulated by the number of plants. So a lot of people didn't like to go over 99 plants on their grow, but you wanted to produce as much cannabis as possible in those set number of plants. And so people grew really, really large cannabis plants. And a norm of 6 gallons of water per day became sort of a commonly used metric. But in fact, we have some research that shows that at the height of the growing season for these really big plants, that's not a bad estimate for how much water cannabis uses per day. But that's only during the height of the growing season and only for really big plants. But the thing is, this metric is no longer an accurate way to measure cannabis water use. And this is because today's growers are typically growing many more smaller plants. And so instead of growing a few large plants, they're now growing multiple small plants in the same area. So using this plant count and applying the 6 gallons to these smaller plants leads to typically large overestimates of water use. Luckily, over the last number of years, our research team, along with a number of other researchers throughout the state and country, have been working on the issue of cannabis water use. And so we can now give you some much better answers as far as how much water cannabis actually uses. So we have estimated water use using records from 618 farms in Mendocino, Humboldt, and Trinity counties. These are a combination of mixed light and outdoor growing. And what we found is that in Northern California, mixed light uses about 2 acre-feet per year of water. We found that outdoor cultivation is a little bit less at about 1.5 acre-feet per year. This is self-reported data from farmers. This is not metered data, so there may be some issues there. But we think this is pretty good data, and we only use what we consider sort of the best data. So most of this data was not actually recorded by the farmers themselves, but by consultants who were hired to try to figure this out. A new point of data that we've just seen in the last 2 weeks is the Mojave Water District down in the desert commissioned a study that actually measured and metered water use inside a hoop house to see how much water use was being used. And in that region, which is of course hotter and drier than Mendocino County, they found that it took about an acre-foot of water to lead to 1 harvest. And they were saying 4 harvests a year were fairly common in that area, which would be about 4 acre-feet of water per year. And so I think this gives us some pretty good benchmarks where, we're finding somewhere around 2 acre-feet of water in Northern California, having up to 4 acre-feet in Southern California probably makes sense. So I think this is a good way to think about water use with cannabis, especially because cannabis is now regulated on the square foot, right? So thinking about it by the number of plants is no longer in tune with the actual regulations. Using this data, we can extrapolate to the question of, is this efficient? Is cannabis an efficient crop? And I always like to preface this by saying it really depends on how you measure efficiency. If you're talking about the amount of money you can get for using 1 gallon of water, cannabis is going to be the most efficient crop in California. If you're interested in calories and you want to know what can you get the most calories per gallon from, cannabis is going to be the least efficient crop in California. So when we talk about whether cannabis is a thirsty crop or a non-thirsty crop, it really depends what we're measuring. What we found in a study using different data, so this is a study with about 50 farms all across the country, and looking at the yields per gallon of water. That study, we were able to find somewhere between 1.8 and 3.3 grams per gallon of water. If we think of a farmer getting paid $1,000 a pound, and we're saying that's about $2 a gram, that's looking at an estimate between $3.6 and $6.6 per gallon, or about $650,000 per acre foot. So these farms are producing a lot of monetary value for the amount of water they're using. Comparing this to other crops, water use efficiency, we have estimates for wine and almonds. These are statewide estimates, so these aren't just Mendocino County estimates. But, cannabis is from a dollar perspective worth a lot more. If we think about it per serving, this was a calculation I'd never seen before, but it was requested, so I thought we'd try it. So if we think about a serving as a 1/2 gram pre-rolled joint, that equals 0.13 to 0.25 gallons per serving. Almonds, apparently 23 almonds is a serving. They take about a gallon per almond. So, about 23 gallons per serving. And a glass of wine, which we're looking at 21 gallons per serving. And I should say for all of this, this is just for growing of the crop. This isn't including processing, water used in other parts of the supply chain. So this is just growing it. And for the glass of wine, I used some data. And Glenn, I was actually laughing to myself before. This is actually from a 2007 UCCE report. You may have been the author of this, I'm not sure. But some of the assumptions in here is basically we were looking at an acre foot of irrigation for wine grapes, 4 tons per acre, 3,000 bottles per acre, 15,000 glasses per acre. And that's how I came up with those numbers. So, that should be thought of as a broad estimate, right? That isn't the most precise estimate in the year, but it gives you sort of a sense of scale as far as servings per gallon of water. So this is some basic information about water use in cannabis. But I want to pass it over to Chris now, because the total water use is only part of the issue. What also matters is where the water used and when in the season is the water used. So Chris, I'll advance the slides and just tell me when.
Sure, thanks, Van. Right, so as Van was alluding to, some of the research we've been doing is more focused on the potential for impacts of cannabis water use as opposed to just the amount of water cannabis uses. And some of the biggest factors of potential impacts is thinking about water extraction and when it's drawn out of streams or other natural sources, which is kind of how cannabis is irrigated. And so some of the early research we did was look at what affects when water is drawn out of natural resources. And the two biggest factors were where you're getting it from and how much storage capacity you have. And so the first one being the stark difference between people who use wells versus who just divert surface water. And so for people who use wells, it's just drawn on demand. And depending on how close that well is to a stream, it'll vary how immediate the impact is. But when people are extracting, it peaks in August. The growing season, is from April to the end of October on average, with a nice curve that increases steadily and peaks in August, but it's quite high still in June and July and September. Comparing that with surface water extraction, in which it tends to be more flat across the year because people tend to put water into storage in off-season months. This is not considering forbearance requirements. So some of the data we had were actually prior to forbearance requirements. So this actually gives us the opportunity to know what farms are capable of. That is, when we're thinking about potential entrance into the regulated industry, what they're capable of. Ben, can you give me the next slide, please? But one of the big things we found is that storage capacity is usually insufficient to meet a complete forbearance requirement. The caveat is, farms that have irrigation ponds typically have the amount to store that amount of water, but honestly, few farms actually have irrigation ponds, roughly 10%. And that's for a number of reasons. One of them being that installation and use of ponds is pretty tightly regulated. And the alternative being just using your standard water tanks. We think about a farm the typical farm using 150,000 gallons of water to meet all their crop demands. That would be 30 or more 5,000 gallon tanks. And as we know, tanks above 5,000 gallons require their own host of permits and permitting. So it's just not really an option. So what we see is that most people are using wells. And in Mendocino County, The most recent data we have, it's about roughly 75% permitted cannabis farms using wells. And of those, about 2/3 are actually outside of groundwater basins. Next slide, Ben, please. And so the reason we make that distinction of in groundwater basins versus like more upland habitats is because the geography of cannabis is pretty unique in that it's often clustered on the landscape, and that it often, like I was alluding to, occurs outside of its groundwater basins. And so while the actual amount of water use is comparable or less maybe than some other crops, it's really about the location. And so to have a number of farms clustered in one particular area can lead to sort of more localized impacts. And again, this note that near stream wells anecdotally are quite common. There's very few data actually on well locations, but field reports and some limited data we've seen from Sonoma County suggests that wells tend to be located, their location is biased towards streams because that's frankly where it's easiest to find groundwater. Thinking about cannabis inside groundwater basins, we kind of view this as less of a concern because, as Van had pointed out, in agricultural groundwater basins, cannabis is not really that different from other plants or from other agricultural products. And then finally, when we think about the large amount of unpermitted farms in Mendocino, so some of the more recent work we've done was trying to project how many of those farms would be using wells if they were to transition into the regulated industry, and it's quite a large number. Humboldt and Mendocino combined is about 60%, and in Mendocino it's closer to the number that the percentage you see among permitted farms, which kind of makes sense, I guess. But some of the transitions, some of the alterations they would have to make to be part of the regulated industry would probably bump that number up even higher. So what we're seeing is that cannabis is generally irrigated by wells, and it's this potential for near stream wells that we've kind of put our finger on is one of the things we're most concerned about. And I think that's all the slides I have, so I'll leave it at that.
Excellent. So yeah, that's our presentation.
All right. I see hand raised. Supervisor Hashak.
Thank you, Chair Jurdy. Thank you for the presentation. Very informative. A question about this groundwater versus near stream well water. Do you have any research about where these are located, whether they're rangeland or, we're assuming that ag land is mostly groundwater, but I'm not sure. Do you have that research?
Well, we have the locations of farms, yes, and we have the water sources they use. And so, as I had mentioned, I think I'd said something like 2/3 are outside of groundwater basins in Mendocino County. As to how close they are to streams specifically, those data aren't collected. The only data we've had to sort of get our hands on was some state water board data from an emergency order down in Mark-West Creek in Sonoma. And so there we were able to plot out well locations relative to streams and do a comparison where we just have a random uniform sampling of the landscape, and then where wells are located. And by comparing the two, you see that wells are more biased towards streams than just what you'd expect otherwise.
And I would guess that, with your research, you dealt with mostly permitted grows?
Yeah, so some of Van's work has been trying to get a handle on the distribution of unpermitted grows, but as far as water use practices, that's still kind of early. We're currently doing a project with CDFW in which we're trying to get some data from unpermitted farms to get a sense of how they differ. Especially in terms of water waste, there's a lot of practices that are reported, overflowing tanks and leaking pipes and things like this that on a permitted farm, they'd be subject to regulations and more likely to have more upkeep.
I would say we do have a little bit of data, self-reported data from about 130 unpermitted farms. And in that data, we don't see a big difference between the unpermitted and the permitted farms. But this was a survey that we administered, and I think there's probably a subset of the population in the unpermitted industry that was unwilling to take our survey. So I don't want to extrapolate that too far, other than to say we do know that there's some subset of the unpermitted farmers who are probably acting similarly to the permitted farmers, and there's some subset of the unpermitted farmers that we don't know what they're doing.
Okay, thanks. Supervisor Williams, then Supervisor McGordy.
To refine Supervisor Haschek's question, can you describe any differences between upland wells and valley floor wells?
Well, the assumption there is that the valley floor wells are drawing from aquifers that aren't in turn pulling from streams. I don't want to get into the weeds too much, but this little diagram I have up here is just a demonstration of what's known as like stream flow capture from upland wells. And so water that would otherwise be flowing into a stream is captured by a well. And in cases in which it's a near stream well, if that extraction occurs to deplete the nearby groundwater enough, it will actually draw water from the stream.
Thank you. And then one of your early slides, I think it showed a 30% increase in water consumption per year for mixed light. Is that, we're using year as the metric. Is that due to mixed light having multiple growing seasons, and there may actually be more yield per unit of water?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. So this data set, which is probably our richest data set in terms of water, we don't actually have yield data for. So I can't answer that specifically, but I have a feeling you're right about that.
The other reason behind that is because this is on a per square foot of garden of the and so for outdoor plants there's a lot more spacing between plants, and so for that reason, by comparison, indoor plants is just one sheer canopy, so all of that is using water. So on a square foot basis, that's why we tend to see more water use per square foot for mixed light.
And last, overall, based on the data you've collected and analyzed, what would be a comparable crop? There's a lot of concern about cannabis, even in this small 2-acre, 5-acre, 10-acre range, depleting our groundwater and affecting competing uses. Is that a legitimate concern, or is it similar to another agricultural crop that we already have in Mendocino County? How would you rate the severity of the concern of cannabis water use?
I mean, I think on a per square foot basis, it's pretty similar to most vegetable crops. Tomatoes or things like this. That's what we've been seeing, although I know that's not a huge industry in Mendocino County. Again, on the sort of dollars per gallon, it's quite high relative to basically anything else. So, I mean, I guess I would say, on an area basis, it seems to use a little bit more water than grapes, but on a dollar basis, it uses less water than anything else, and probably on an area basis, it uses something similar to your vegetable garden.
Supervisor McGordy, then Supervisor Mulhern.
Well, first of all, thank you, Van and Chris, for joining us today. And this is really good to have some real information that's research backed. I'm curious, how many? What's your sample size for determining the information on cannabis?
Sample size for? Sorry, I didn't catch the last part of your sentence there.
Yeah, what is the sample size for the cannabis cultivation sites for both outdoor and as well as mixed light?
So these data are coming from the North Coast Cannabis Program, and they currently have about 3,000 enrollees or more. Of those, I think they usually get 1,500 to 2,000 reports per year. And so the reason I think the data Van was discussing was 2019 data. So that 618 reports came from something like 1,500, but after QA/QC and only using farms that reported using a water meter to get their water, or they knew their application rate. So cutting out people that were just giving their best guess, or some other metric. But so it's on average about maybe 1,700 to 2,000 data points, and then somewhere between 600 to 800 good data points per year. And those are usually split up as far as like outdoor and mixed light. It's a pretty even mix. I think outdoor might be slightly larger, but I think it's like 1/3 outdoor, 1/3 mixed light, and then 1/3 farms that have a combination of outdoor and mixed light.
So it's a fairly robust data set in your opinion.
Pretty good.
So just by comparison, so we estimate that for apples and pears in Mendocino County, they use about 2.2 acre feet in both the Anderson and Ukiah Valley. So it's a little bit less water use than pears. And the other point that just a question for you. So my assumption is that cannabis cultivation in the upper watersheds is probably having more of an environmental impact than something that would be down in groundwater basin areas, is something that I've been saying. Would you agree with that?
I would say that's accurate.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Supervisor Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm wondering well, thank you very much for the presentation. I think that Supervisor Williams has called for this information as it relates to wine versus cannabis. And I think it was a very helpful presentation, and hopefully the community has been able to view it. Given that we know retaining surface water should really be a priority, are there any opportunities for the board to, I guess, ease restrictions for ponds versus, multiple water tanks like you had in your image? Given that the state regulations are so stringent because we're in a drought, are there any opportunities there?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an engineer, I'm not someone who's qualified to know what the impacts of site development that would be required for much larger water tanks. But I do know, I've been out on some sites, and when you see 40 water tanks, it does seem a little unrealistic that it can be done fairly easily. And if they could be consolidated, it's a lot of water. It's a lot of water to store. So I know that a lot of regulatory agencies definitely favor tanks over ponds. CDFW in particular, because of invasive species like bullfrogs and other issues that come with open water sources like that. So I think it would be beneficial, if water tanks were easier to use.
Okay, thank you. Supervisor McGorty, before we go to public comment, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, just on the issue of ponds, it's sort of a mixed blessing. So the advantage of the ponds, they're quite a bit less expensive to install than tanks, and they do serve other ecological functions. They're used by more than just invasive bullfrogs, which Fish and Wildlife gets pretty upset about. But having a small pond myself, I see lots of different birds take advantage of it, as well as other wildlife from it. And you can install a 150,000 gallon pond in the right location for around $25,000, and it could be filled with wells in the winter when the impact is not so strong, or directly from the streams by forbearance when there's high flows. So I think that there are advantages to using ponds.
Absolutely. And another consideration that I've heard is it's less plastic on the landscape, and especially thinking about burn plastic if these were to burn. So definitely.
Yeah, ponds typically don't catch on fire where water tanks do.
Yeah.
So that's a real issue. And only line ponds, am I thinking about here? The cost of that $25,000, about half that's installing a liner. But the liners last for 30 years, and they make a huge difference.
Yeah, I think ponds or tanks, anything that facilitates cannabis farmers to be able to afford and use storage I think it's a good priority.
Okay, all right. Well, I'm looking to the clerk of the board. Do we have any public comment on this item?
Yes, we do. We have one from Michael Katz.
Good afternoon, supervisors and presenters. This is Michael Katz, Executive Director for the Mendocino Cannabis Alliance. We're grateful that the board is considering the science-backed information provided by the Berkeley Cannabis Research Center. We have previously submitted cannabis water use data to this board, developed in conjunction with the CRC, and have repeatedly pointed to their research that licensed cannabis uses way less water than many in government and the public realize. The presentation from CRC today clearly indicates, as is the conversation just had, the benefit of ponds for licensed cannabis cultivators. Supervisor McGorty has credited his pond for providing water necessary for his agricultural operations, and the importance of water storage for cannabis and other types of agriculture has been discussed at length in these chambers, as of the challenges that exist in developing these solutions locally. County recently passed an urgency ordinance enabling the installation of temporary water tanks for folks who are impacted by the drought. MCA strongly recommends that the board direct staff to create an urgency ordinance to streamline the process for approving the installation of irrigation ponds and other water storage methods in response to the current drought emergency, to enable cannabis and other agricultural operators to prepare for the new realities of climate change. As this board is aware, many emergency relief programs for small businesses are not available to cannabis operators. In this time of historic drought, we urge you to ensure that funds coming into the county in response to state of emergency not be withheld from licensed cannabis operators who contribute significantly to the socioeconomic stability of this county. We understand that staff are working with the Farm Bureau to determine how available resources can be directed towards their members, and have requested the opportunity to discuss similar scenarios with regards to the hundreds of locally licensed cannabis operators. We remain available to have that conversation and request that a meeting be set up to discuss at the county's earliest opportunity. We further recommend that the board adopt the presentation by the CRC today and make a clear public-facing statement from the county with the facts about local small batch cannabis water use presented here. This action will get us one step closer as a community to abolishing prohibition-based stereotypes and the vilification of small local cultivators as being somehow responsible for the historic drought we are all currently facing. It is essential to fill the public conversation around this controversial topic with empirical data as opposed to misinformed preconceptions. And we thank the board for bringing in CRC to reinforce our past statements, citing the realities on the ground with their work. We sincerely appreciate the efforts here today to inform fact-based considerations of this important issue, and we hope you take up our recommendations. Thank you for your time.
And that concludes public comment.
Okay. Well, again, looking to go back to Supervisor McGorty, any actions or directions you'd like to see the board take? You're muted.
I would like to make a motion to have the board accept this report into our record and then use it as a reference document as we move forward with cannabis licensing.
Second, and would the first be willing to add some direction to follow up on a small sample of claims of wells running dry due to cannabis farming? I think we've all heard it. We've talked about it in an open session. You know, I would be happy with a small sample size, even 3 at this point. Maybe get a hydrologist to look at the situation and advise. Do we have cannabis farms impacting groundwater to the extent that neighbors are running dry, or is it just due to a historic drought?
So I think that's a really good question, but I think it's a different item, and it's one of the. I'd want a little bit bigger sample size. 3 is not enough. I mean, statistically, to start getting a little bit more confident, I'm sure we'd want at least 20 or 30, and that depends where it's located. So that's a pretty tough scientific question. It deserves studied. And as we move forward, we need those kind of data to make good decisions for 2218, assuming that the ordinance is still going to be with us.
Would you like that to come back as a separate item? Do you have interest in working on it?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. And in fact, I would love to work with these gentlemen in the future. I have a lot of confidence in their research, and also their colleague Ted Grantham, who grew up in southern Humboldt County. So I'm very concerned about Supervisor Haschak's district and the Gill River Basin, which I think is heavily impacted by a lot of issues. And of course, everyone in Humboldt County is worried about Scott Dam and Lake Pillsbury, but I also worry about what's going on in a lot of the tributaries where I think that there are significant diversions going on, and we should at least know for our own backyard what's happening.
Okay, so we've got a motion on the table. And for clarification, is there a follow-up direction related to this further study, or simply an understanding that there'll be a separate agenda item coming up at a future point?
A separate agenda item coming up.
Okay, all right. Can we have roll call on the motion?
Supervisor McGorty?
Yes.
Supervisor Mulhern?
Yes.
Chair Jurdy?
Yes.
Supervisor Williams?
Yes.
Supervisor Hashak?
Yes.
The motion carries unanimously.
Okay.
Thank you, Van. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for apparently agreeing to work with Supervisor McGorty on a follow-up agenda item.
It would be a pleasure.
Yep.
Thank you. So that takes us to 5A, which is discussion possible action of a public safety advisory board or alternative, and an ordinance adding chapter 2.39 of the county code for the advisory board. And this is a follow-up item to an item we heard earlier and many months ago, and county council is bringing it forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to recap briefly, last year, the Board of Supervisors formed an ad hoc committee to explore the possibility of creating a public safety advisory board. The ad hoc came back and the board went ahead and directed me to draft an ordinance setting up the appropriate legal structure for there to be a public safety advisory board. Then when we brought that back earlier this year for enactment, there had been some questions regarding AB 1185 and in particular how that may or may not change what it is the board wants to do. So at that time, the board asked that the board decided to hold off on passing the ordinance and asked that I do a little bit of research and come back to the board. I have looked up AB 1185, my sort of simple conclusion is I don't know that it really changed much. There was some, what AB 1185 did was it created the ability for the Board of Supervisors to create a sheriff's oversight board or to appoint a commissioner for the purposes of facilitating its duties under Government Code 25303. And just to clarify, those are the sort of supervisory and oversight functions that the board has with respect to all county officers. And we've gone, I know this has come up in a few contexts, but the board essentially has the ability to be reviewing and to be conducting oversight of those county officers that it may not have the power to direct. And there can actually be a bit of a spectrum on this. So, the board, for example, even as a certain officers that the board appoints, for example, the ag commissioner, the public health officer, et cetera, the board may not be able to direct those officers in how they perform their specific duties or how they exercise their statutory functions. My own office is a bit of an example of this. I actually think it makes a nice contrast because my primary function is to advise the board and to act as the board's legal representative, which means that in many cases I'm acting at the direction of the board, but I do have some independent statutory functions. For example, I have to do an impartial analysis on any ballot measures, and on those functions, the board is not able to direct me. Now, when it comes to those things, the board still has the ability to be sort of reviewing the conduct of the officials, reviewing the conduct of the offices, and the statute specifically sort of calls out areas of fiscal or expenditure of public monies and sort of fiscal responsibility as one of the primary areas that the board can be taking a look at. So the board has always had the ability to go ahead and be reviewing these things, and has always had the ability to create a board or a commission or some sort of body for the purposes of facilitating in that review, for any one department or for multiple departments. What AB 1185 did was it clarified. So let me back up a little bit. 25303 contains some language that indicates that the power to supervise and to review the departments should not be used to obstruct the investigative functions of a sheriff. So essentially, if the sheriff is looking into a crime, conducting some sort of criminal investigation, the board's sort of political review and its oversight should not be exercised in a way that's going to prevent the law enforcement functions from going forward. So you could foresee situations, for example, where if a criminal investigation is ongoing, reviewing some certain information in a public setting may end up jeopardizing an investigation. You could have situations where the use of those powers might conceptually be able to cause problems on the investigative side. According to legislative history on AB 1185, one of the concerns by some counties was essentially that if they were to exercise their subpoena power, which they already have, and the board will recall, you actually authorized the issuance of a subpoena earlier this year for the Ordner Group's Ordner Group's records related to a contract. These sort of general subpoena powers, that the use of it might inherently end up being something that would impede the investigative functions of a sheriff's office. I'm not sure exactly where that concern was coming from. That was what was articulated as part of the reason that the statute was brought forward. What it indicated was that the intent was to clarify that creating some sort of body with this function and with a subpoena power would not by itself be something that would end up impairing the investigative functions of the sheriff or impeding or obstructing any particular investigation. I attached a copy of the statute there. You can create a body with sort of a different scope and mission than what you initially sort of tasked me with writing. Looking back at the direction that I had and looking at the areas that the board wanted to proceed, it seemed like you had to focus primarily on community outreach, on overcoming language or other barriers that may prevent there from being effective feedback to the sheriff's office, and having something that was focused on sort of community relations between the sheriff's office and the community on the whole, and some sort of role for civilian input, et cetera. It did specifically sort of limit the scope, the areas that in the proposed ordinance where you'd asked that the board or this new board not have powers. Several of them were things that it couldn't have powers over because of statute, but there were a couple of them in there, in particular, not giving it subpoena power and not giving it the ability to conduct its own investigations, that were choices that the board had made on sort of a policy basis. You don't have to go with either of those, but the ultimate question really for the board is sort of what do you want this body to be, and what direction do you want to go with it? So I attached to this item a copy of a NACOL document. It was the National Association of Civil Oversight of Law Enforcement that had sort of discussed, the different sorts of models that are out there for various types of civilian oversight bodies. And I think the biggest takeaway that I had from that one was there doesn't appear to be any one best practice. What appears to be sort of the common question to be asking is what is going to suit the needs of a particular community, what is going to suit the purposes for which we're creating the entity. And I think that's really sort of the fundamental question that the board needs to make its decision on is, what is the goal here, and what would you like to accomplish? You certainly do have the ability to give this body subpoena power, regardless of whether you're giving it some sort of different mission or different function. Those subpoena powers actually exist independent of this new statute. The board has a general ability to be authorizing itself or various other subordinate bodies, for example, the Civil Service Commission, to go ahead and issue subpoenas. But I think the question is really, what would you want those for, and what is the purpose that this entity is going to be used for? And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions the board might have.
Looking at board members, Supervisor McCordy.
Thank you. So, Councilor Curtis, Sonoma County recently ran into some difficulty with their proposed police oversight board, and it seems to center around actually the unions and police individual deputies being subject to review. And I just wondered if you could comment on your take of some of the issues that we'd want to avoid if we want to put together this ordinance.
Well, so a few things there. So you do want to be careful about the MMDA obligations and anything that would be potentially affecting the rights of the union members. I don't know, the initial proposal that the board had put forward, and the ordinance that you had me draft was pretty specific that the Public Safety Advisory Board would not be conducting its own investigations. It would not be making any sort of disciplinary decisions or any sort of policy decisions for the sheriff's office. And I don't, frankly, I'm not entirely sure that you would be able to, well, you can make a civil service commission, which will review the actions of the sheriff. I don't know that you would necessarily be able to create a body that would institute discipline on its own. That ultimately falls to the sheriff to be deciding, whether or not to be instituting any sort of disciplinary action. The requirement under the MMBA is essentially that if you go ahead and you make changes to the disciplinary process, that you do need to go ahead and meet and confer with the unions first. Now, I don't know that I've understood the prior proposal to be doing anything to be changing that process. Now, if the board wanted to go into a direction that would impact that, I would be recommending you meet and confer. That doesn't mean you can't do it, although quite frankly, there are other limitations beyond meet and confer that would impact our disciplinary processes, one of which is that our current civil service ordinance was a creation by initiative. And therefore, the board's ability to make changes to it are pretty limited. There are certain things that you might have to go back to the voters for. There are certain things the voters authorize the board to make changes to by 4/5 vote. So I think what your question is getting at is primarily the MMBA obligations and what might happen essentially if you change the structure there. But that wasn't the initial proposal. If it is what the board wants to do, we can talk about the meet and confer process there. But I think we need to figure out, I think I need a little bit more information as to what the board might be wanting to do on that front before I can really tell you what you would need to do before accomplishing that.
So, and one other item too, in terms of representation, a group I think that really needs to be at the table is someone who represents a mental health community, because so many of problems we seem to encounter often involve patients who are having a mental health crisis. I don't know how to address that. I suppose it could be done from the point of view of supervisors and who they choose to appoint, but I'd want to be sure that they were somehow represented in discussions.
Supervisor Hashak.
Thank you, Chair Jurdy. Supervisor Jurdy, or Chair Jurdy, and I were on this ad hoc that came up with this, and we started last probably June or before that. So it's been over a year that we've been contemplating this. If we look on page 2 of the document, the section for the powers and duties of this Public Safety Advisory Board, we do have quite a range of options and activities that they will be engaged in. And just looking down, the outreach to the community, but examine and report on interdepartmental issues, the review of the current policies, review redacted reports that are presented to the Use of Force Board, and then nominate a member of the public to the Use of Force Review Board. And we were working on this with Sheriff Kendall and a group from the community. And I think that we did come up with a very workable document. And I think that if we go to try to incorporate the subpoena power at this point, we're going to end up in another year-long mess or delay for this. And I think that really we have people who want to work on this. I think there are issues in our community where public safety is an issue, that greater dialogue between the sheriff's office and the communities will be beneficial to everyone. And I just think that if we want to go with using the subpoena power and some of the things that are permitted by 1185, then that should be a separate item, and we should bring that back at a different point. But we should adopt this now and get it going, and then we can bring back the other, if that's what people want.
Supervisor Mulhern.
Thank you. I'm hoping that Clerk of the Board staff could let Sheriff Kendall into the meeting. I think it's important that he is part of the conversation. I had questions around specifically, as Supervisor Hashak mentioned, item D and E. These seem like a very technical duties, and I'm just wondering how that's going to work, trying to appoint community members that are going to clearly understand if the current sheriff's office policies are applicable with law. I mean, I'm just not sure that our community members, I can see all of the other items as being something that the community members could engage in. It was D. And also with item E, and maybe the ad hoc can explain this, if we have a use of force board that determines the outcomes of use of force, what would the Public Safety Advisory Board be doing different than what that other board is already doing?
Well, I'll speak first. The Use of Force Board exists. It was the committee's understanding, Supervisor Hashak and myself, that it and the community members that met with Sheriff Kendall, that the Use of Force Committee has itself not met in some time, and it currently does not have a member of the public on. Again, this proposal was to add a member of the public appointed by the board onto that committee, and so that was part of the reason for having this oversight, this Public Safety Advisory Board, to at least see the redacted reports. Sheriff Kendall or Supervisor Mulhern, do you have something else?
Yeah, that's still there. That's item G, but that's not what I was referencing. I think that that's a fine job for somebody on this committee. It was D and E that I have concerns about the ability of the community members to really be able to actively engage in those items.
Okay. Supervisor Hashak and then Sheriff Kendall.
Thank you, Chair Judy. And Sheriff Kendall could certainly add to this. I think the point was that, greater transparency, and the Use of Force Board was an internal committee in the sheriff's office. And if we could just have this Public Safety Advisory Board reviewing the process that was they went through with the Use of Force Review Board, and just to make sure, and provide that community input into that process, I think that would be very effective and something that would benefit both the sheriff's office and the community. With the other reviewing the current policies for compliance, I think that Sheriff Kendall is very up on this. Certainly, that's part of his job, is to make sure that our policies are in line. But there's miscommunication in the community, and the community needs to know that the sheriff is implementing the policies. And people sometimes would get all upset with the carotid chokeholds. And if you talk to Sheriff Kendall, then that is already state law. It's already being implemented in our sheriff's office, that we aren't doing that. And so that kind of communication and kind of give and take with the sheriff would be beneficial to getting the word out to the community too. And if Sheriff Kendall wants to add anything to that, I'd appreciate it.
Well, certainly. And through the chair, Supervisor Mulherin, I'm sorry, when they were letting me into the meeting, I lost probably 15 seconds of your comment, so I'm not sure what you're asking me about on this. But as far as our policies and procedures and our general orders, we use Lexipol. There is literally a team of attorneys that works for Lexipol, and just as soon as new statutes and case law come down the pipe, our general orders and our policies and procedures are updated. And so it's not like we get behind on these things, because we have a very robust group that is constantly watching to make sure that our policies and procedures meet the needs at the moment. And I heard you mention D and E, I believe.
Yeah, and I was actually just asking that you be brought into the meeting as part of the conversation, because I think that was important. The questions weren't directed specifically at you. They were more directed at ad hoc regarding items D and E, because they seem very technical in nature for a citizen review. But understanding that there are, attorneys that are reviewing the policies and keeping them in compliance with the law. And according to Supervisor Hashak, the intent was really just for this advisory board to be able to communicate public concerns with the sheriff's office. Did I get that right?
Yes, and I think that especially with D and E, I mean, conducting its own investigation and interfering with the performance of the sheriff, I'm sorry, those are two things that won't happen. It's just a matter of, this would give us an opportunity to have better communication. And when people have questions, we can point them in the right direction. I would like to see something like this for the entire county, because there are so many questions that are out there that exist. And, I've been working with Chief Locatelli on several things. I've been working with our district attorney, Dave Eister, on several things. And it seems that, it's almost like we are a group as a whole for public safety here. And all of us should be at the table to have discussions regarding these things, talking about the things that we're doing in the jail, talking about the things that we're doing with probation, talking about the things where we're trying to move in the right direction on a constant basis. And something that often comes up are things that are seen thousands of miles away from here that have absolutely nothing to do with what we do, but we still wind up answering questions for those. And a lot of those questions, I would rather not speak for Chief Locatelli. I know that he doesn't want to speak with me or for me, but we could get together and we could all speak as a group about our individual pieces of this puzzle that we're working on. And I think in the way that it's written, I think it's a good product. We had a lot of discussions over it. And I feel like this is one of those things where we have an opportunity to put forth the absolute best service that we can in Mendocino County. But we've also got to be able to have the discussions about why we do things the way we do things, the things that we're moving forward on, and the things that we think will be really beneficial to the community, as well as the folks who work with us.
Mr. Chair, could I ask for clarification on one point?
Go ahead.
So I believe I heard reference to section D and E. I wasn't quite sure if we were talking about D and E under 2.39040 or 0.0060.
I assumed it was under 0.040, Supervisor Mulhern.
Yes, correct.
And then I did want to clarify, there was a statement about appointing someone to the use of force Board, I just want to be clear, the language that we have is nominate. I don't think it would be, other than providing a name, I don't think that it was going to be changing the appointment process.
Correct. That's the wording in the proposed resolution and ordinance. Supervisor McGordy.
So a couple questions. So Public Safety Advisory Board would report to the Board of Supervisors or be answerable to the Board of Supervisors. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then do they have any staff support? Is there or anybody who can assist them should they need really anything? Or are they completely independent or on their own?
Well, let me add this. Part of our discussion with the community members in developing this involved discussing a model similar to this. I'm not saying it's identical, but similar, that the city of Fort Bragg has had in place for at least 20 years, maybe 30 years. And I think it has been at least 30 years, the city of Fort Bragg has had a public safety committee of the council, and it basically serves as a public safety advisory board. The staff people listed are the police chief, public works director, because transportation is often, traffic issues often come up in a city. And the two voting members are two members of the city council. But it meets nearly every month. And it's a venue for members of the public who just have questions or concerns or comments to bring up issues. And so that was not identical to what was proposed here, but it was part of our discussions in bringing forward this proposal. And for staffing to it, besides the chief of police, public works director, I would say the administrative support in that case comes from the police department. Has that, they're taking the minutes, they're agendizing the meetings.
So in this ordinance, who would have that responsibility?
Well, it looked to Sheriff Kendall, but we did not propose something outside of his office. I think we were assuming that the sheriff's office would provide the maybe shaking his head. I don't remember this
personnel to provide that. I mean,
okay.
With just my records reporting and whatnot, where I'm responsible for reporting to the Department of Justice, my records division is short to begin with, and with the latest RIPA enhancements, the changes in 290 registrations and whatnot, it has put us further behind. And I wish that I had someone that I could put on this, but I just currently don't have the staff.
So that's a little bit of a concern of mine, because things like this to be successful do need some level of support. And then the other thing that I don't see in here is how specifically do they interact with the board. I would hope that we'd have at least an annual report or update, because I think that's really important. Looking at the Behavioral Health Advisory Board and some of the very good reporting that they've done, I'd want the same thing, so that we can track what's going on, so that it matters. So what makes me crazy is if we ask citizens to give their time to Mendocino County and then really never give a chance to see it expressed or heard. And I think it's really, really critical if we're going to ask people to serve on this board that they have a structured way to interact with us.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I think the staffing question is a good one. I think that's one we run into with a lot of the advisory bodies, et cetera, that get created. I think it's an appropriate discussion for the board. I would just suggest that whatever you decide, you don't put it into the language of the ordinance. You can probably do that just through separate action or direction.
Thank you. Supervisor Hashek, and then I also see Probation Chief Locatelli raising his hand.
Okay, thank you, Chair Jordy. So answering Supervisor McGordy's questions is that we have talked about the staffing, and I think that one model is the Climate Action Advisory Committee. They don't have real designated staff, but at the same time, we have enough that they make it work. And And so whether it's the interns we have or whether it's the support from the CEO's office, I think that we'll work that out. The other thing is the bylaws are still, the committee's going to have to work on their bylaws. And I think part of that is going to be how much they report to the board and whether we want it every 6 months, every year. I think those things are things that the committee and with our direction, we need to work out. But certainly there should be a designated pathway for how their work is getting reported to the board.
Just a quick comment. I think that's great. Just as long as if we ask people to work for us, they need to be recognized. They need to be heard. That's the only point that I want to make. They need to be helped because there'll be times where they will want things that they won't have access to from the outside that inside of county government can be provided probably fairly easily. So those are my concerns. Is that we're going to do this? Let's have a good program.
Right. Exactly.
And those are good points. I mean, I think, the Climate Action Committee is working as hard as they can. I think in hindsight, we probably could have helped them a little more early on. So it's a good point to bring it up now. Probation Chief Eisen Locatelli.
Good afternoon. I heard Sheriff Kendall mention my name, and Chair Jurdy, I believe you talked about the Fort Bragg model. When I hear Public Safety Advisory Committee, I think of it being bigger than law enforcement. Somebody mentioned, I think it was Supervisor McGordy, about needing mental health on this committee. And I think you need to also consider substance abuse disorder treatment as part of this committee. Probation is a big portion of public safety. But when you think of traditional law enforcement and use of force review board, some of these organizations and entities aren't necessarily a part of what you're doing. So I wasn't entirely sure, what are we trying to accomplish with this agenda item? Once we've defined that, then defining who needs to be a part of the committee. But I really do like the Fort Bragg model of having a set meeting, a set time for issues to be brought up, for expected participants to be there, to have a question and answer session with the public. Transparency is important, but if it's not the right players at the table, I don't think the public gets what they really want out of it. It's easy for silos to happen in departments and for that to be not my problem, not my backyard. This is all of our backyards and we all need to participate, but we have to understand what we're trying to accomplish before going into it. And, I wasn't part of the ad hoc committee. My ideas weren't a part of that, but, I think this is bigger than just law enforcement and bigger than the sheriff's office. And I think we are all wanting to have more transparency. And in criminal justice in particular, in my mind, we have 5 to 10 new laws that we have to implement every single year by the state. And I just don't know if everybody in the community knows about those laws that are being passed, that we all subscribing to Lexapol and having people do it, because our counties are too small to have teams set on reviewing penal codes and case law to implement this. We contract out to do the implementation and make sure our staff know the new laws and policies. So I think some of this is a bigger discussion than for just today. I hope you get something started today where we can branch off and have good dialogue in the future. And that's what I wanted to add to this section.
Okay, thank you. Any other board comments before we go to public comments? Supervisor Hashak.
And I would just add that when we're looking at the nominations for this committee, there'd be one person from each supervisorial district or supervisorial appointment, and the sheriff would be on it, and a member of the Board of Supervisors. And I think that really the goal is to get people who represent the cross-section of this community, this county that we live in, and whether they represent underrepresented communities such as Native Americans or Hispanic community or African American, or, key areas such as mental health or substance abuse. I think that we need to be really, just like we did with the Climate Action Advisory Council, we need to try to broaden the outreach as much as possible, because I think that will be key to its success.
Okay, thanks. Do we have any public comment on this agenda item?
Yes, we have one voicemail.
Honorable board members, my name is Zohar Zaid. I am calling you regarding item 5A for today, July 19th board meeting. I'm a member of the Deputy Sheriff's Association. In Mendocino County, we enjoy an increasingly rare positive relationship between law enforcement and the community. As a public safety advisory board is being considered, let us all work off of that momentum of goodwill that we already have in this county and continue to work in collaboration to ensure that the community and law enforcement remain in partnership. This seems to me to be the end goal of any citizens advisory board, to maintain those open lines of communication between an agency and the citizens that we serve, and also the union. Please consider having one member of the advisory board come from the Deputy Sheriff's Association, as this would undoubtedly assist in maintaining open lines of communication in good times and when especially needed in times of turmoil, if they ever do present themselves in this community. Thank you for your time.
And that concludes public comment.
Okay. Looking back to the board for any direction or motion. Supervisor Hashak.
Well, I would move to adopt the ordinance adding chapter 2.39 of the county code, creating a public safety advisory board.
Second.
Okay, I've got a motion and a second. We have had discussion about follow-up discussion about staffing the committee and the appointment of people to it. So that'll still be further deliberation by the board. But so we have a motion. Any comments on the motion?
Yeah, I'm per what Supervisor Haschak said, I assume some of that will come through via the bylaws, or does that have to be amendment to the ordinance? Perhaps county council can weigh in.
I'm not sure I caught all of the details that were mentioned, but it sounds like the items being discussed would be appropriate for the bylaws. Was there one in particular you were concerned might need to be in the ordinance?
I'm just not sure really what's the best methodology for doing this, and that's all. I'm not familiar with creating a public safety advisory board and how all of the arrangements should be set up to be maximum effective.
Yeah, and I would just say generally from a legal drafting standpoint, my philosophy is when creating these sorts of bodies, govern composition, terms, and a lot of the basic structure, but leave a lot of the processes and details to the bylaws or other action. And that way you don't have to go back and amend the ordinance for smaller changes. That can be done through an easier process. But the basic structure of it does need to be in the ordinance itself.
Okay, can we have a roll call?
Supervisor Mulhern?
Yes.
Supervisor Williams?
Yes.
Supervisor McGordy?
Yes.
Supervisor Hashak?
Yes.
Chair Jurdy?
Yes.
Motion carries unanimously.
Okay, thank you. We're going to take a break, and then we're going to come back to notice public hearing on fees. And so it is now 2:43. We will come back by 3 o'clock. contact their supervisor. Supervisor Hashek, was there anything else you'd like to add?
No, that was good. Just much appreciation to the great team that worked on this.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, now we're going to go on to item 5B, which is a notice public hearing and to discuss the possible action, including adoption of resolution amending the Exhibit 10, which is the master fee schedule effective August 15th, 2021 for probation, animal care, clerk recorder, and cannabis management unit. This item was continued from July 13th due to lack of time on that agenda. So for this, we're going to go to the executive office to open it up.
Hi, good afternoon, Chair Jurdy, members of the board, Darcy Antle, Assistant CEO. So pursuant County Code 47, the Executive Office fiscal team is bringing forward a fee hearing, amending the master fee schedule effective August 19th for probation, animal care, clerk recorder, and the cannabis management unit, a continuation from the July 13th board meeting. I want to be clear, there is no impact to juvenile hall fees. The impact is the elimination of a juvenile fee in probation, along with the deletion of other probation fees pursuant AB 1869. At this time, I want to turn this over to fiscal lead on this item to Principal Analyst Tim Holman.
Good afternoon, Supervisors, Chair Jurdy, Assistant CEO Antle. We finally got a fee hearing before you. Unfortunately, it's not a full fee hearing, but we have brought forward quite a few new fees for cannabis, as well as a couple new fees for animal care, as well as for the clerk recorder bringing in one fee that they finally got through to a review. It's taken some time for everybody to get used to get the information out there for the fee hearing. So this is somewhat of an abbreviated hearing. Normally, we would have one fee hearing a year as required, and then we'd also have another fee hearing come winter. And we have penciled in another date in December, December 7th, in an attempt to come back with you with a more comprehensive fee hearing, just as people start to get more used to it. But again, we have these fees that are up here. If there are any questions that you need to direct to any of the departments, they'll be happy to answer any of the questions that you might have for this.
Okay, so to start things off, then do we have any questions from board members about any of the proposals? Supervisor Hashek.
Thank you, Chair Jurdy. For the probation department and Chief Locatelli, you know, the loss of these fees through AB 1869, that how is that going to impact your budget?
It's looking like Eisen is not on. Let me see if I can get him on. Would it be okay to move on to another department and come back to him?
Sure.
I'll see if I can contact him. Thank you.
Okay, and then I did have some questions about the cannabis fees.
Right. Is Kristen available? There she is, coming on now.
Hello, good day. Kristen Nevedal, Cannabis Program Manager. Happy to answer questions about the cannabis fees that we looked at.
Okay, when we talked the other day, we were trying to look at this parity issue that's being brought up by MCA and CCAG, and you had some reasoning for, you know, some differences between PBS fees and the cannabis program. Could you explain those?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. So I just want to make a note that the fees listed in the MCA memo are not fees that we are proposing. Those are fees that are currently in place and have been adopted by Planning and Building Services and then approved by the board. So the fees listed there are in relationship to fees that are already in use. And so a lot of the reasons why we don't see parity in the existing fees, for example, is that the cannabis applications have much more review associated with them and environmental compliance components than do any standard agricultural fees or review processes. Additionally, if we look at just the AP issue, because I know we are suggesting a new cannabis administrative permit fee today, which can be found on the very last page of Exhibit X. Also, Tim has scrolled to that on your screen. But in the matter of parity, the administrative fee, the cannabis administrative permit fee that MCA points out is the current cannabis administrative fee. They compare it to the original administrative fee for other land use issues requiring administrative permits that come through planning and building. It is my understanding that the current cannabis administrative permit fee is elevated above and beyond the standard administrative permit fee because additional findings were added because of cannabis and specific agency requirements that other types of administrative permit activities do not need to have it analyzed when looking at that administrative permit review process. The jump between the cannabis administrative fees that you see here, the fee listed currently is $1,261 for cannabis administrative fees per PBS. That's the existing fee plus $90 an hour. We're proposing a $1,551.86 administrative fee. This reflects the additional cost associated with the additional noticing and environmental compliance components that are outlined in 22.18. So currently, cannabis administrative permits do not get noticed the same way as a minor use permit. And then under 22.18, they were elevated to the same noticing level as a minor use permit. Additionally, if that permit applicant is on a private road, we would have to notice all of the residents that frontage that private road leading to the applicant's location site. So we are suggesting an additional roughly $300 in permitting fees for a cannabis administrative permit to cover the cost of permitting under 22.18. I hope that helps. I'm happy to go through some of these more individually, but that is one that is notable and hopefully covers the parity question.
Okay, and one of the questions is a renewal fee. And I guess it might take board direction for a renewal fee if there are no changes to the cultivation setup.
Well, the renewal fee is not just in consideration of the changes or the modifications to the cultivation setup, but also to employees. So if additional employees have been added or changed for a transition over the course of the year, there are live scan requirements and that sort of review. So this fee did go down slightly. And so it does reflect our time to manage the renewal. So that's also notifying, reviewing, and then managing the paperwork and the billing and financial components of managing, receiving, and issuing those permits.
Well, would there be a difference
like strictly no changes?
If there were no changes at all? Do you think that that could be priced out?
I mean, how would we verify that there were no changes? Would we put an inspection on it, or we would just let people renew annually without verifying that there were no changes? I mean, I'm open to the discussion, definitely, and more than happy to take board direction on it. But what would we be looking for? Just a simple affidavit that they made no changes whatsoever to their cultivation site, their other components that we usually ask for in a renewal application. Is that what the suggestion is?
Right. And if they could sign an affidavit saying that there were no changes to anything in their application, then would it make it easier for you and cut the price down? That's a question that's being asked a lot.
I believe we'd be more than happy to take a look at that. We would have to, it's my understanding, bring that back for a future fee hearing if that's the desire of the board and the direction of the board. But yes, we'd be willing to explore that.
Okay. And then if I could do one more.
Go ahead.
Is the tax appeal fee, and for the smallest cultivations sites of 2,500 square feet, is that my understanding is that to file for the tax appeal, it would end up costing more to pay the fees than they would get back in even if they won the appeal. So I'm just wondering if there's a way we can deal with that for the smallest of growers.
Well, I think that there's some confusion about the tax appeal, the initial fee, which is when the cultivator files for appeal. That fee we're looking at lowering by about $70, $60 right in there. So it's a 17% reduction in filing that appeal. So what we're proposing is a tax appeal fee of $283.14. It's the tax appeal hearing, I think, which is where farmers have expressed that they have concerns that if they have to go to a hearing, the cost of moving through that hearing eats up essentially the value of repealing or appealing the taxes themselves. So I think, the time it takes for us to verify that an appeal is valid and that we're willing to grant it is the same amount of time regardless of the size of the cultivation site. And I imagine that that's the same as far as an appeal hearing is considered. I think we could look at down the road, and I believe that there's some board direction to look at down the road, whether or not there's a way for cultivators to declare reduced cultivation square footage ahead of time. So it might be possible to look at some sort of a Humboldt County method that allows cultivators to say, I am only going to cultivate 2,500 square feet of my 5,000, or I'm taking the year off and so should not be subject to taxes. I do believe that it's been board direction for us to come back with that sort of proposal. And my short of this very long answer is I don't necessarily think that we can adjust these appeals per farm size or scale because the review isn't determined by the amount of cultivation they have for the review time. But we might be able to remedy it in other ways down the road through a different agenda item.
So being a little more proactive, we could probably reduce the fee. Okay.
I suspect that, yes.
Okay, all right, thanks. Supervisor McGordy?
So I have a question in terms of how you determine the fees. Are these based on your experience with the average cost of doing a particular process or permit?
That is correct. They're based on not just experience here within the Mendocino Cannabis Program, but also the foundational prices of what was set forth by planning and building for the set of fees that have been established. So all of the administrative permits, minor use permits, minor use renewal modification, major use permits, major use renewal modification, the cannabis variance, the cannabis tax appeal and tax appeal hearing fee, these were already pre-established fees that had information about the hours and the time associated in processing these. We made some adjustments to these. For example, as a standalone department, which I think is possibly where we're headed in the future, and not being within PBS, we can't take A87. A87 is a blanket cost recovery that you can add to fees that cannabis currently is not eligible for. So it brought down some of these costs. Again, when we're looking at new administrative permits, minor use permits, major use permits, and renewals or modifications for those activities, what we're looking at here is new fees, and they do take into consideration some of the elevated requirements that were set forth in 22.18, as we wanted to make sure we were prepared with fees that hopefully covered our cost of reviewing those applications with elevated environmental review considerations and noticing considerations. So they are based on what planning and building has put forth or before the board previously as far as hours of consideration. And then we elevated the noticing fees to the levels of major use. That was an easy way to do those. The 10A17 fees, we had a little bit of a harder time finding historical record about hours associated with 10A17. However, a number of our planners have been here for quite a while, so we've been doing some time tracking on these fees over the years. These fees appear to be elevated with respect to the initial application review, inspection, and issuance fee. They are not elevated though, because what we did is we folded the two-part fees that currently exist into one fee. So initially under phase 1 and phase 2, the 10A17 fees, applicants paid an initial application review and inspection fee and then an issuance fee. In discussions with the planners, there's not a lot of clear way to break up the difference in the work of a review and inspection versus the issuance. So we folded the fees together into one lump fee. And then this is where we ended up. So it's actually, if you combine the fees, slightly less than what a combined fee would currently be under 10A17. So you see increases marked here on both the 10A17 initial application and issuance fee, as well as the renewal and modification fee just below it. But essentially the prices go down slightly because we folded them together. And then we are looking at this modification fee so we can double use the renewal, as we have a lot of folks that want to modify that renewal partway through the 12-month cycle of that renewal issuance being valid. So I hope that that helps some.
Yeah, so with 2218, if you do get a major use permit, for example, that's going to last for multiple years, correct?
Correct. It's my understanding that under 2218, any of these permits would last for a number of years, but there are also fees associated with the development of these permits that aren't here. So for example, this is the planning review and gets us through, say, the zoning administrator and or the planning commission's review and approval, hopefully, of that permit. But it doesn't cover any fees that might be associated with the filing of a notice of determination or exemption. Different filings have different fees associated with them when it comes to CEQA. So those fees would be in addition to the permit fee listed here for 2218.
Thank you.
Thanks. I do see a hand raised by Eisen Locatelli, the Chief Probation Officer. We want to shift back to questions on the probation fees. Okay, Chief Locatelli.
Sorry, I was on another call, an SB 823 call. So Chair Hashjack, I believe, is the one who asked. If you could repeat the question, I'm happy to answer it.
Thank you. So my question was, when we eliminate all these fees because of AB 1869, then what is the impact on the probation department's budget?
So I gave a quick talk to the board about AB 1869, maybe several months ago at this point. We did a calculation on that. It's over a 5-year period. A rough calculation is $325,000 of revenue that would be lost to the probation department. And that money was essentially as you use the general fund dollars for probation. So they could be used for programming, personnel, literally anything. And it was revenue, obviously, from the fees that are being eliminated in this bill. 1869 doesn't affect just my department. There's also a fee from the sheriff's office on electronic home monitoring and the public defender's office on their ability to charge clients for attorney's fees. I don't see them on the fee schedule to be eliminated, but they can't charge them. So they may have to come before you in December just to eliminate them from the fee schedule. Also, you have some literature that's out there right now on this. So there's a $65 million backfill from the state. There's a proportional allocation breakdown, 50% based on your 3-year average of your county's adult population, 25% based on a 3-year average of misdemeanor arrests in your county as compared to the state, and 25% based on total traffic, non-traffic, felony, and misdemeanor filings in your county. That money then comes to the board, and then the board chooses how to appropriate that to a department. And there's also some requirements that you are to report where you're going to assign that backfill allocation, which department you've chosen, their total annual budget, and then each of the departments that receive it are going to have to keep an account of the expenditures that they have on those revenues. What's not totally identified yet is 1869 is the iceberg, SB 586 is in the pike, and the state has already identified that they're going to up the 65 million to 151 million this year, 151 million next year, 130 million after that, then 120, and then an ongoing unidentified amount. And those will be for additional fines that haven't been eliminated yet. So we don't exactly know what else the legislation is going to eliminate. We just know the state is moving to take away fees and fines on defendants and placing it either on the county or the state for the backfill. And in this case, they've identified the state's responsible for paying for these fees and fines, and it's just the county's obligation to decide which departments to put them in. And I proposed previously to give you a percentage-based formula that you could enact for transparency reasons based on the loss to each of the 3 departments. Of course, as you can see, ours is probably between 80 and 95% of the lost revenue here.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And so the state is actually going to backfill the lost revenue, and we just need to decide how we're going to, spread it out back into those departments.
Correct. We've been talking with the auditor about setting up an account where this money comes in specifically separate from the general fund, so that it's the county has a better way to know which monies it's received, and then as you apportion them out to a department, that department has an understanding of how to explain what those revenues were used for. And yes, the state is saying that they're going to backfill this, and CPOC and CSAC are sponsoring some of this to help our local congressmen understand the impacts in a county like ours that was dependent on a lot of these revenues.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, any other questions for Chief Locatelli? Okay, not seeing any more. Thank you. And you might, maybe you'll just monitor the rest of the meeting, but may not have any more questions. Do we have any other questions on any other fee in the proposed hearing? Supervisor McGordy?
So just for clarification, maybe you know this off the top of your head, Kristen, but someone who wants to get a permit for a 10,000 square foot Sun Grow, what would they expect to pay the county for the privilege?
I think that really depends on their zoning and which ordinance we're talking about, right? So the type of permit under 2218 really has a lot to do with the way the parcel is zoned and then the parcel size. So that determines whether the cultivator will be subject to an administrative use, a minor use permit, or a major use permit. Under 10A17, all of the sizes have the same permitting price.
So what's our actual numbers, do you think? I realize it's a little hard to understand, but completely, but what's the range?
Right. So a renewal for anyone who currently has a permit under 10A17, what we're proposing is $734.68 for an annual renewal fee. We're proposing this new 10A17 initial application review, inspection, and issuance fee of $1,651.02, which is different than, I don't have the combined fee in front of me, to be honest with you, of what the old fee was with the issuance fee. And I can look that up for you in a minute here. But this would be applied to anyone applying under phase 3 should we accept applications for new cultivation under phase 3 of 10A17. So this is our attempt in sort of getting out in front of the potential to have to open up that phase 3 application process under 10A17. Additionally, every cultivator subject to or applying under phase 3 of 10A17 is required to or would be required to undergo sensitive species habitat review with Department of Fish and Wildlife. So then we pay out, the county does those fees directly. I'm hoping this fee would cover those costs, but I don't have a bill from Fish and Wildlife yet to actually know that for sure. I'll look on the website and tell you what the combined cost is, but you'll have to bear with me a moment. So my apologies. So currently, for application under phase 1, the application fee is $1,871 plus, so it is a combined cost. So the annual application fee along with issuance is $1,871, and we are bringing it down to $1,651 according to this fee sheet and what is listed on the website.
Okay, any follow-up questions, Supervisor McGordy?
Oh, that's good, thank you.
Supervisor Hashak.
Thank you, Chair Jurdy. Kristen, with the Appendix G, and it's listed as $694. And my understanding in our conversation was that that is kind of like an estimate for kind of the base fee. And if a person presents a Appendix G that's really problematic, it would kick into the $90 an hour after that?
Yeah, that is correct. And I really want to apologize. This $881 listed here next to Appendix G that looks like a current fee was a transcription error on that the cannabis program made. So that should actually be a 0 in that current fee column. We have been billing at a rate of $90 per hour. There's generally some admin time and staff time that goes in, which is calculated into that fee. So I don't have the fee times in front of me, but what we're looking at is at least an initial hour of staff time in ensuring that that Appendix G is complete and ready for acceptance and forwarding to a planner for review. And then the planner, in general, when we have a very well prepared Appendix G, is taking around 6 hours to review that Appendix G. Sometimes it's a little longer. And then we also have administrative time that occurs after the Appendix G has been approved, which includes scheduling an appointment with the applicant to come pick up the signed Appendix G, pay for the fees, and then the bookkeeping associated with those fees. So this really covers the cost associated with that initial review for completion, as well as the planner's review. And then, as I mentioned, all bookkeeping and meetings that might have to occur to get that finished Appendix G back to the applicant or the permit holder.
Okay, so at what point would a person be advised that they're going into the extra $90 an hour fee?
Yeah, when we've burned through what's been allocated for the planner. So the planner fees or the planner hours are broken out separately from administrative assistant or staff assistant or my time in the review. So as the planner is getting close to exceeding the hours we've allocated for planner review in this fee, we would notify the submitter of the Appendix G that they've basically maxed out the amount of money we've set aside for planner review, and then start billing at $90 an hour to finalize that planner review.
Thank you.
Any other questions on any of the fees by board members? All right. Do we have any public comment on the hearing?
Yes, we do. First will be online is Michael Katz, followed by Ron Edwards and Monique Ramirez.
Good afternoon, board and program manager Nevidal. This is Michael Katz, executive director of the Mendocino Cannabis Alliance. Thank you for this in-depth review of the fee items today. Understanding the conversation and hearing all of the various complexities that go into these cannabis applications and permits, I think it's important to remember that these fees also that we're talking about are not the only fees that applicants are faced with when getting their permits in place. So, every little bit is essential to these small businesses for them to be able to retain and not have to put into additional costs. I think we are seeing more and more clearly the need for the regulatory issues around cannabis in order to be able to achieve the parity that is deserved to be addressed both on the local level and at the state level. And so we continue to encourage this board to address these issues with the county's legislative platform. And the chart that we provided in our memo was indeed to identify the various differences and show the lack of parity. And I appreciate the understanding of that, and I appreciate that it is more complicated, but I think that we want to move to a position where it's less complicated and it's easier not just for the applicants, but also for the county. So I encourage any steps that can be taken, MCA encourages any steps that can be taken to make this process more simple and less expensive. We would like there to be adequate training and situational education to staff as they're reviewing these items in order to provide an efficient and streamlined process that minimizes staff hours and applicant hourly fees. And we appreciate your considerations of these items and really encourage anything that can be done to halt the extraction of as much resources as possible from these small farmers. And with the funding that is being provided by the state to assist existing operators get to their annual licenses, we hope to see that funding be earmarked for some of these fees and enabling existing operators to take advantage of that program to get to their annual license by whatever means necessary. Thank you for your time.
Next on the line will be Ron Edwards, followed by Monique Ramirez and Paul Hansberry.
Good afternoon, board. I would like to follow and continue with where Michael Katz is in as far as keeping the fees easy and as simple as possible. I thought at one time there was conversation of keeping and streamlining the program, particularly around the live scan, so that would be a possible look at that, because that is a state level issue that could be adopted. And also, you know, with the fees, is it set up now so that someone through the equity program would be able to have the fees covered with the equity money that would be made available for them? An issue that I don't see here, I know it's not on the cannabis department, but have you worked on the fees for scales? Because that was a higher rate than for ag when that had no particular additional review done to that one. And I would just, you know, really like to see this made really simpler for the people in the current program going through, and to be able to use some of the money, if there could be a scale or a procedure set up ahead of time. Because if a farmer is scraping by and they come up with that 90, you know, it's $90 more, what is it, you know, do they have time to come up with that? What is going to happen? Is it that at that point they need to pay or they get out? And then the final thing I have is that I'm trying to think of a parity. If I had an auto repair shop with a spray booth, and that has special fees for that, and I decide I go out of business, I notify the county and I am out of business. Whereas with the cannabis program, if you go out of business, you have to pay a tax appeal fee. So I didn't hear that addressed, and I would really like to know how the county plans on going forward with that. Or will cannabis always have an exit fee? Thank you very much for your time.
Monique Ramirez does not appear to be on the line, so next will be Paul Hansberry, followed by Susan Tibbins.
Hello, good afternoon, board. This is Paul Hansberry, Lovingly and Legally. And I want to make sure, there we go. There's a couple of things that I wanted to address. There's many more that I won't have time for. But starting with, I had 3 shipping containers permitted for ag exempt. And part of the review process was I think it was $141 from environmental health for their review, times 3 for the 3 shipping containers that they didn't have to really look at. The closest answer I could come was that they had to see if they were in a leach field for a septic system, which they were not. But $143 times 3 for shipping containers for environmental health. And they said it's all because the board said that we should do that, we had to do that. So there are some fees that are really unnecessary in a lot of cases. Let's take, for example, the Appendix G. Is this starting now to be like your minimum tax for a small cottage operator? Watch this, pay $1,200 and some odd dollars, whether they make any sales or whether they cultivated the cannabis or not, or whether the crop came in or not. Whether they sold it or not, they still have to pay that minimum tax. Is the Appendix G still, now this is the minimum fee instead of the $90 an hour? It should be that if it's a very simple review process, especially for the smaller farmers, if they are compliant, it should take less investigation. So these sorts of things, as well as the appeal for the thing, I filed a notice of non-operation or a notice of stay a year before, but still I was asked to pay the tax and had to pay the fee for the appeal, even though it was known by the program that I wasn't going to be cultivating. There's a lot of things, and it seems to me that the people are being paid a salary by the county anyway, and so why are all these different fees being assessed? It's just more nickels and dimes. The Appendix G, I never thought I had to do that. I thought the county had already done the thing when I set the filed the application. So now I've got to pay $700. There's just a lot of things that are really just chipping away and chipping away and chipping away. And I wish there was a way that there could be exceptions to these rules. Thank you very much.
Next on the line will be Susan Tibbins.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Susan Tibbin, lovingly and legally. You know, despite the status of cannabis as an essential service during the last 20 plus months, many hundreds of very small operators have seen no financial gains whatsoever from that status. Municipalities up and down the state have eliminated fees and taxes, or at least deferred them, to help small business ride out the continuing pandemic. But the Mendocino Board of Supervisors seems to have gone in the opposite direction, adding fee upon fee, taxing cannabis not on what's being grown and or sold, but on an arbitrary amount of cannabis, which many of us do not grow. Those of us who do not sell flowers, but make value-added items from our small crops have seen no financial remuneration in 2021 at all. Where is the recognition of us who have tried for years now to do the right thing? The Mendocino County Board of Supervisors is incentivizing the alternative market. The new fee schedule accrues hundreds and hundreds of dollars in new fees. We do not have the resources that you seem to think we have. Our positive suggestions are tax cannabis on the amount grown and sold as recorded in metric. Tie the fees to the size of our farm and operation and employees. Reduce or eliminate some portion of fees in recognition that we too are and have suffered huge losses during the last 18 months. Provided there are no substantial changes to the operation, renewal fees should be nominal, at most a third of the original fee with a notarized affidavit if need be. And finally, we are not overseers of grows. We are experienced stewards of the land and farms. Many of us are older. There are no other jobs for us. We're not criminals skating on ill-gotten gains. We're trying to survive, and you are killing us by 1,000 cuts. How about starting to work with us? Offer us a carrot instead of the continued sticks. You know, when a Monique Ramirez says that she's had it, we should all sit up and take notice. Things are really bad. We need your help, not your continued killing us by 1,000 cuts. Thank you, and thank you for your continued work. We recognize the difficulty, but please start to meet us at least halfway. Thank you.
Next on the line will be Monique Ramirez, who will be followed by a voicemail.
Hello, Board of Supervisors. Monique Ramirez speaking on behalf of the Covelo Cannabis Advocacy Group. I hope you guys can hear me okay. We submitted a memo last week outlining the changes that we'd like to see regarding the fee schedule. Something that's really alarming to us is the Appendix G fees were called out as an original amount of $881, but now it's being changed to $698 and some change. But we were always told that from the get-go that it was going to be $90 an hour. So just curious where those figures are coming from. My apologies, I haven't been able to tune in this afternoon for this discussion. So if you haven't gone deep into that, we'd love to hear a comment. And if you have, my apologies. But we definitely want to see people be able to get some sort of financial relief if the review takes less than the 11 hours that has been allocated for the staff time on this item. That would be great. We don't want to see people paying more than they should. And also people have already gone through this process and have been billed for a smaller amount. And so it would be wrong, I think, to change that at this juncture. And And I think that there's just a lot of things that need to be re-examined in terms of how many hours it really takes for staff to review an application, especially with regards to the minor, major, and major use permits with respect to 22.18. We haven't actually received those applications. And so it's hard, I think, for the county to have an understanding of what those costs truly are until that process unfolds. So I would hope that, if anything, the county can put together this proposal and move it forward in the master fee schedule, but come back and make amendments if needed, and check back in a couple months after this process has rolled out for people to apply and really get a better analysis of how long it's really taking for staff to conduct this the review and then reflect those changes. Also, with regards to people that need to appeal their taxes, we outlined how crazy it is that a cottage operator who's being held to a $1,250 minimum tax amount, if they were to go through a hearing process, would end up spending more money to appeal it than they would to just pay the tax. So we have to figure out a way to reach cost recovery and also allow people the opportunity to appeal taxes. And clearly they can't afford them, so we shouldn't be charging them as much as is being outlined. And I understand it's really tricky because we also need to make sure the employees are being paid their wages and stuff like that. But we just got to figure something out. And with my limited 14 seconds, I won't be able to say a lot more, but I really hope that the CCAG memo is reviewed and really looked at, because we spend a lot of time on these memos and put a lot of thought into them and really try to offer great recommendations and feedback.
Next will be the voicemail.
Hi, my name is Rachel Powell Walensky, and I am calling in regarding item 5B. I am a mother in this community, and I have a 5-year-old going into kindergarten, hopefully, and a sophomore going into high school. I am calling in to request that the county supervisors commit to assisting the local school district in giving the opportunity to return to school the fall semester here in Mendocino County without a face covering, or for it to be optional depending on that family's health, wellness, and needs. The health, safety, and wellness of our children here in Mendocino County is of utmost importance to me. I am a long-standing member in the community. I value our community and our wellness. My mother has been a teacher here in Ukiah for 30 plus years. I, really know what it's like to be here and in our community and on the ground. I have seen the effects of what this last year has done to a lot of teens in our community and their social dynamics, their inability to be able to communicate, and what I fear would happen to our incoming children into the school district. I feel like on a grassroots level, we need to stand up and advocate for our children, and this is one of the ways that I think that we can do that. So if you could please take my consideration here to, again, give us the opportunity to have an option of a face covering in the fall, that would be incredible. I think you are going to see a lot of people that want to be part of Ukiah Unified School District but are choosing other schooling options because of the mandatory mandates that might be coming our way. And I know how important it is for our children in our community to be building.
It appears that might have been for a different item, maybe for tomorrow's 5B. So that concludes public comment at this time.
Right. So if we have no more public comments at 3:49, we'll close the public hearing and go back to board members. Supervisor Mulhern.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to thank the cannabis program manager and her team for working on these fees. If you look closely, our friends that are in phase 1 are actually paying up to a third or 4 times less than anybody that would apply under the potential CCAO ordinance. I think that we've learned a lot about how long it takes to process cannabis applications. And as Ms. Nevedal explained at the beginning of her presentation, there's substantial environmental review that goes into the cannabis permits that isn't required on all of our permits. Regarding the minimum tax, is still my understanding, as it has been, that this was something that was voted on by Mendocino County residents. And the minimum taxes are something that would have to be changed by a ballot measure. So if anybody out there listening would like to put that on a ballot, I know that you're all very capable of getting signatures for petitions for putting things on ballots. So that's a great opportunity to do that. I think it's unfortunate that the agenda item was postponed and then it was kind of just hanging out there very long with maybe a couple of typos that caused a lot of concern in the community, and hopefully those questions have been answered. One of the things this board has been trying to do is to get cannabis applicants successfully through the process. And I think we're all looking at what's it going to cost to do that? How do we hire qualified staff that's going to be able to process applications in a timely way? And we all know that time is of the essence, and making sure that we move this program forward really is a priority of the Board of Supervisors and the community. So I just wanted to put that out there. Thank you very much for the presentation today.
Thank you. Supervisor Hashak.
Thank you, Chair Jurdy. So yeah, I think a lot of work went into this, and we're still dealing with some things like Appendix G, which are unknowns. I'd like to give board direction, see if the board wants to give direction for a couple items. One would be an affidavit for renewal, the renewal fees, and if there's an affidavit saying that they did not change their the cultivation or employees or anything like that, that would cause more work, that they figure that the cannabis department or program figures out a nominal fee for that, an appropriate fee for not having to deal with any changes. The other is a tax appeal fee, and certainly there's some problems with that, but I think with Program Manager Nevedal's idea about being proactive and saying up front that you aren't going to cultivate or you reduced cultivation or something, that could alleviate some of the time required from staff. And so I'd like to see that implemented, especially in a time of drought. If a person's saying, I'm not going to cultivate as much, that would be a win-win, where, as the water isn't used and cultivation's reduced and the fee could be reduced because of that. Or if they go out of business, I think that would be another reason to have a different kind of fee for a tax appeal. So I'd I'd like to give that direction if the board is amenable to that. And also that the state funding, the $18 million, maybe some of that could be used for fee reduction for people.
Okay, maybe we could get some feedback from Kristen or other county staff on Supervisor Hashak's proposed direction.
This is Cannabis Manager Kristen Nevedal, and I'm happy to provide some feedback. So affidavit for renewal, I think we can definitely explore that, but again, we wouldn't be able to bring that back until the next fee hearing, so we can prepare something for the board to review. I believe in December is when Tim said we had the next fee hearing scheduled, so we'd be happy to do that. Tax appeals, I'm looking at ways to modify that so that there's a proactive solution as opposed to having to file appeals after the cultivation cycle has ceased or ended. I'm happy to work with the Executive Office and the Tax Collector's Office on bringing a proposal forward for that. The local assistance program, We can't do an outright fee deferral through that program, but we can cover the costs that are directly associated with environmental review. So we could build in a fee deferral program, say for Appendix G, which is specifically a CEQA review document. I think that would qualify. We might also be able to look at down the road if 22.18 is viable and an option for our 10A17 applicants to transition into using some of those monies to defer the cost of environmental review that's built into the fees for 2218, but we can't do an outright 100% across the board fee deferral. So just wanted to note that, but also happy to answer additional questions if I may.
Thanks for the feedback. Supervisor McGordy?
So I think the old saying is trust but verify. So while I think that what Supervisor Haschak says makes a lot of sense, especially people who are deciding not to grow this year because of lack of water. But we have to have some way of verifying that they are indeed doing what they say they're doing. And these are high for cannabis. So it's part of the cost of doing business, just as these are high for infrastructure for vineyard. It costs a lot of money to plant an acre of vines. And it's just something you take into consideration if you want to do this. I want them to be fair. So if it does cost, the way that we're funding the cannabis program is general fund dollars. So we have to look for some method to be able to afford to do the initial permitting and certainly enforcement, because there's a lot of people who don't follow the rules at all, and it's costly for the county to try to deal with that. And I realize that it's not fault of people trying to legally comply, but it is a cost that we have to think about overall of having cannabis in our county. So it's not all income, there's considerable expenses as well. So I think that our fee schedule kind of reflects that. And trusting the cannabis unit to be really fair and accurate on putting together their proposed fees, because I really have no way of otherwise knowing what's going on.
Okay. Any other comments before someone would like to make a motion? I was thinking, would someone like to make a motion?
Move the recommended action.
Okay.
And I'll second. If the recommended action is what I said.
Well, I think the recommended action was in the item. I'm okay on the other points coming back. I don't. I think we would have to give a little bit more guidance as to I don't know what staff would do with those recommendations without more guidance. If we want we've gone through the tax appeal fees in the past, and we came up with what we thought was a lightweight system. It's still too much, but how are we going to pay for the appeal process, the actual staff time, if not through the associated fee?
So what I heard the cannabis manager say is that we do have an opportunity to use a portion of the equity funds to pay for the CEQA analysis for projects, Appendix G. That would be one way to assist in the fees. So if nothing else, that would be a new direction from the board, given new information that we have.
Do we need to give the direction on how we want that 18 million utilized, or should we leave it to staff to maximize it? We want as much of that use as possible to help the existing 10A17 small farms. And you tell us how it could be applied in the most efficient manner.
If I may, through the chair, is it okay if I respond to that, please?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, and thank you for that. So the $18 million that the county is eligible for, 100% of that really has to be utilized to assist 10A17 farmers as we know them today, those that have provisional licensing, because that pool of money is specific to assisting our local cultivators who have provisional licenses and achieving annual licenses. So this is why the fee deferrals that we can use that money for are directly in relationship to environmental review or anything that's CEQA related and not other sort of standard review fees. So I just wanted to make sure that that was clear. And then as we're putting together the proposal, because the county does have to submit a proposal with a budget and benchmark timelines, as we're submitting that proposal, it's my understanding that we'll be bringing that proposal to the board for approval and discussion before we submit it to the state. So I just wanted to reassure you all that there will be time to provide input into that proposal.
Follow up, Kristen. That should go back to the board you're expecting before the next fee hearing in December?
Yeah, I certainly hope so. While we haven't seen the timelines for applying for the local jurisdiction assistant grant funds, the conversations I've been having is that they're hoping to get those out very quickly so that we can apply for the monies and have them in hand in the bank account essentially. Hopefully before the new year is what we're looking forward to. So I'm already starting to kind of shape some kind of high level ideas about how we might utilize those funds to both assist staffing so we can have efficiency in application review and permit issuance, fee deferrals as the board has discussed today, a water tank and forbearance program to help assist with reducing environmental impacts. But that's kind of what I'm thinking right now. And also potentially putting together a direct grant fund to help folks with their Department of Fish and Wildlife and water board work orders.
So I think we can all agree we want to maximize the effectiveness of the $18 million in the state funds. And maybe we could just agree that it's board direction that a proposed spending plan for the $18 million would go back to the board prior to fee hearings in December, because I think there could be some connection between the two. Does that work for everybody?
Yes.
Supervisor Hashak?
Yeah, I'm agreeable to that. I would second Supervisor Williams' approval of the fee hearing. And I would also like to provide direction to staff that staff in the cannabis department or program and the cannabis ad hoc committee work on these issues of the renewal and the tax appeal fees. And that can be brought back in December.
Okay, and the concurrence from the maker of the motion?
I'm okay with that.
Okay, all right. If there are no other comments, maybe we could have a vote.
This is Atlas Pearson, Deputy Clerk of the Board. I just want to verify the 3 directives that I currently captured, and I did capture that last one as a directive, not as part of the motion. Please correct me if that is wrong.
No, that's correct.
The first directive is to direct staff to establish an affidavit as a lower cost option for renewal applicants who have made no changes to their application and bring it back at the next fee hearing in December. The second is general consensus of the board to bring a proposed spending plan for the $18 million in state funding to come back before the board at the fee hearing in December, or prior to the fee hearing in December. And the third is to direct the cannabis program staff and cannabis ad hoc committee to work together regarding the renewal and tax appeal fees to be brought back in December.
Yes.
Are all 3 of those directives correct?
Yes, that's good.
Yeah, seeing concurrence on that. All right, well, thank you.
And then for the motion, the mover was Supervisor Williams, seconder was Hashak.
Yes.
Supervisor McGordy?
Yes.
Supervisor Hashak?
Yes.
Chair Jurdy?
Yes.
Supervisor Mulhern?
Yes.
Supervisor Williams.
Yes.
The motion carries unanimously.
All right, well, thank you.
Chair Dirty.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with that outcome, but I think we might want to be careful about the cannabis ad hoc and what the defined scope is. Over time, there's been feature creep, and it seems to be anything cannabis related. I don't know if that was the intent. If it's the intent today, that's fine. But I find myself as a cannabis ad hoc, John and I working on matters that are really outside of putting together a land use ordinance draft, which was why we created the ad hoc.
Okay, so for that, maybe we could go to County Council to see if they have any feedback on that comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I do recall that the cannabis ad hoc was created for more limited purposes related to the cannabis cultivation. I would say generally, and this is not just the cannabis ad hoc, but all of the ad hocs. I think it's important to have a good, clear definition of a limited scope of what the ad hoc committee is dealing with. What I would say is the more you have one committee that's dealing with sort of a general topic or a general subject matter, you start to look like a standing committee as opposed to an ad hoc. And it's not especially well defined exactly where the dividing line is, but a standing committee has ongoing subject matter jurisdiction over a general area. And those do need to be meeting in a manner that's Brown Act compliant, so noticed, public, et cetera. So my general advice on this is that once an ad hoc has sort of reached the end of its use, dissolve it and then form a new one if there's something related. Or just go ahead and create a standing committee that would be able to deal with the issues related to the general topic.
All right, on that point, does the existing ad hoc committee feel that they've concluded their work on the ordinance that they were set up for? Supervisor Hashak.
Well, my understanding was that the ad hoc was to look at creating pathways for the cultivators. So, it was making sure that, our pathways through 10A17 and whatever new ordinance were clear, and that we were working with the state and making sure we were providing avenues for people to get licensure. So in that regard, I would say, yeah, this looking at the fees is probably outside the realm of the ad hoc. So, and I guess we could dissolve, I think we'd probably need an agenda item for this, but we could dissolve the ad hoc.
Okay, so let's plan on having a future agenda item to dissolve the existing ad hoc, and we can always create a new ad hoc to fulfill the directive of the vote we just took. So based on that. Okay. Are we ready to go to the next agenda item? Yes. Okay, that takes us to item 5C, which is discussion and possible action, including an explanation of 3 possible methodologies for redistricting process and direction of staff. And so for this, we're going to go to, let's see, it is the Executive Office and County Council.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Steve Dunnicliffe, Deputy CEO, here to speak to this item. And as background, local governments use new official census data every 10 years to redraw their district lines, incorporating changes in the local population. The U.S. Census Bureau began the decennial census in 2020. However, the global pandemic triggered extended timelines in that public process that we've been struggling with. The county has been informed that final census data will not be received until approximately September 30th, 2021. And in a normal decennial process and redistricting, that this information would have been available by now, certainly. And the state of California is going to need an additional month once the information comes out from the census to adjust the data for all jurisdictions and account for state prisoners that have to be allocated to their last known home address as opposed to the state prison that they may be within. So with this perspective, it's very realistic that we won't have final census data to use to complete this process until October. And in spite of all these unusual delays, at this point, the election code still requires that the boundaries of supervisorial districts shall be adopted by the Board of Supervisors no later than December 15th, 2021, or else the board's jurisdiction and authority to complete this process will be lost. For process requirements, counties are required to engage communities in the redistricting process by doing public outreach, including to non-English speaking communities, and holding public hearings or workshops. In adopting updated supervisorial districts, the board must comply with many requirements. In summary, districts must be based on total population, substantially equal populations per district, and compliance with the Federal Voting Rights Act. There's also newly revised state law that requires the following mandatory criteria in order of priority, and that's to the extent practicable, districts must be geographically contiguous. To the extent practicable, districts must maintain geographic integrity of neighborhoods and communities of interest. To the extent practicable, districts must minimize division of cities or census designated places like towns. Boundaries must be easily identifiable and understandable by residents, and if possible, bound by natural and artificial barriers, by streets, or by the boundaries of the county. And to the extent practicable, encouraged to be geographically compact. With that said, community participation is critical to any of the redistricting methodologies that can be employed. The development of new district boundaries can be accomplished by 3 different primary methodologies or a combination of them. And these are the potential for using an advisory commission for redistricting. That's the first. The second is appointing a citizen independent redistricting commission. And the third is appointing a hybrid redistricting commission. And each one of these have kind of specific attributes that I'll run through. An advisory commission appointed by the board would receive public comment and feedback related to the process and recommend the placement of the district boundaries to the Board of Supervisors. An advisory commission can be staff-based or community-based, but either way, the board retains final authority to determine the new boundaries. With an independent redistricting commission, the board empowers another body comprised of citizens to adopt the district boundaries. Under this model, the Board of Supervisors does not approve and cannot amend or modify the maps created by the commission. The third option, primary option, is called a hybrid redistricting commission, meaning that an appointed body recommends 2 or more proposed maps for placement of the district boundaries, and the Board of Supervisors must adopt one of the maps without any modification except as may be required to comply with state or federal law. It's the understanding of staff that on June 22nd, the board was primarily interested in the advisory commission model. Whether the advisory commission would be staff-based or community-based, public participation is expected and encouraged. Public outreach will include press releases, public notices, and civic engagement through community-based organizations and other active community groups. A redistricting webpage is under development, and it would serve as a primary portal for public information and access with up-to-date information and ability for the public to provide feedback, comment, and map proposals. And another new requirement is that the webpage would retain critical record of the process for 10 years, so really until the next redistricting process. So as far as action today, if the board chooses to utilize a staff-based advisory committee, a proposed schedule has been included for review by the board with 4 public hearings and workshops with the board. This includes an initial workshop this summer led by the advisory committee on the weekday after 6, with at least 4 additional public hearings before the full Board of Supervisors. The last public hearing is timed for board adoption in December to meet the deadline required by statute. With a community-based advisory committee, the board determines how members are appointed, and membership can't include elected officials, their family members, or paid election campaign staff. A community-based advisory committee can be achieved through each supervisor recommending a member to be appointed by the full board. The process of selection would require a few weeks for soliciting applications, followed by board consideration of the applicants, appointment, and then staff training of the members of the committee. If the board chooses the community-based advisory committee, a proposed schedule is included for review by the board with required public hearings in accordance with the deadlines. Staff would begin soliciting public applications and return it to the board in August for board appointments to the committee. Because of the compressed schedule, it's recommended that a quorum of any community-based advisory committee be set at less than a majority. And it's been suggested that if we have a 5-member advisory committee, a quorum be set at 2 members present for a regularly scheduled meeting to minimize potential delays with this compressed timeline. And also, just a final component here for the board's clarity, the current draft map or schedule, I'm sorry, would have a special board meeting added November 17th or 18th to approve a final map and ensure that we meet the timelines. So that concludes my prepared comments for the board on this item.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Any comments or questions for board members? Supervisor Hashak.
Thank you, Chair Jurdy. So I got a press release from the California Citizens Redistricting Commission that they voted unanimously to petition the California Supreme Court to delay the final deadline to mid-January. And so hopefully that will go through and give us a little more breathing room.
And if I may, through the chair, just also for the board's awareness, with us today, we have Lee Farr from who's the county's GIS coordinator, and we've been fortunate enough that Lee is going to be recognized tomorrow as a 40-year county employee. So he's been through this process previously. He's a great well of information. We also have Charlotte Scott from County Council and Russ Ford from Planning and Building.
Chair Jardy, this is Charlotte Scott, Assistant County Counsel. May I respond or clarify Supervisor Hashak's comment?
Sure, go ahead.
I also saw the press release from the California Redistricting Commission and did a little research because I was hopeful that that may signal that we would have more time, the counties would have more time. Unfortunately, the Redistricting Commission for the state of California is only petitioning as to their process for redistricting of state assembly, state senate seats. So any decision on that petition would be limited to that process. However, we are still hopeful that there may be some leeway added, and we're all very hopeful that perhaps the state federal census data will be released sooner than anticipated. There have been some hints in other state lawsuits against the Federal Census Bureau on this point, wanting more time, wanting things to be expedited on the front end. So we're keeping an eye on that. Thank you.
So I do want to go to public comment if we have any, but since we do have Leaf in the meeting, you know, he really has more institutional knowledge about the process here in Mendocino County than probably any other resident of Mendocino County. So I guess I'm just looking at him to see if he has any thoughts or comments on past processes that have taken place here in Mendocino County and how it, you know, the options that are in front of us today.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. In the last several times the county has done redistricting, we've done 2 approaches. They're basically the same approach, although one used just a staff advisory, and the other approach was to use an advisory made up of citizens with staff as technical advisors. And what that process entailed was pretty much what Steve had described to you. We went out and collected information from the public. Basically, where do you want these lines drawn? We showed them the difficulties in redrawing the lines to balance the population, and of course, the criteria we had to adhere to. Given that, the public has always given a lot of good input into the process. You know, we've gone around to different communities in the county and gathered that input. We've usually come up with 1 or 2 or several draft maps, and then the process was having public input on those draft maps. And eventually, whether it was a citizens committee or just a staff committee, those draft maps were given to the board as a proposal. And then in every case that I've been involved with, the staff, the Board of Supervisors made additional changes and came up with their own draft map based on, some similarity to one of the alternatives, and then approved that map as the boundaries for the new supervisorial districts. And that, in a nutshell, is the process we've done in the past.
And Leaf, it seems to me, maybe I'm wrong, but it seems to me that the county's population, our county's population, has hovered right around 85, 88,000 people for decades. What is that your understanding? And I guess it just seems like there may be limitations in terms of changing district boundaries when you have so little population change in a county, because each district has to have the same population. And we have communities that are geographically isolated from each other. We have mountain ranges separating one community from another. It's not like Sonoma County, where you have 3 supervisor districts that need to use up, or actually 4 that need to use up parts of the city of Santa Rosa, because the city of Santa Rosa is such a big part of the population of Sonoma County that I think in that case, at least 3 of the supervisor districts encompass parts of the city of Santa Rosa. In our case, the city of Ukiah is essentially one supervisor district, and but it's not consisting of the majority of 3 supervisor districts.
In the past, what has taken place is that the public input was such that the communities outside of Ukiah did not really want to see the opportunity to have 3 Ukiah supervisors. That was loud and clear in the public input. That can change. We haven't gathered public input yet, but historically, also the public input was that they were looking for 2 coastal supervisors. So one of the things that you have to do is not split up communities of interest. That's just one of the criteria. There's a lot of other criteria that you have to adhere to. So in trying not to split up communities of interest, and you can look at that as people's input as similar economic-based communities, or general area-based. There's a lot of different ways to describe a community of interest. So in trying to craft that, you're right, it's about population density. So some areas are going to be very small and other areas have to be very large, because the population density is spread out such that it takes a lot of people to make up that 1/5 population that you have to adhere to.
Thanks for the historical perspective. Supervisor Hashak, do you have your hands raised?
Thank you, Chair Judy. I would certainly like to see citizen involvement on this. So if we go the advisory route, I'd certainly like to see a couple members of the public on that commission.
Okay. Supervisor Williams?
So my understanding is we've lost population. Do we have any sense of whether that was an equal loss from all districts, or was it more in certain parts of the county?
Well, there's 2 pieces of information that I have seen. One is the annual estimate from the State Department of Finance. They prepare an annual estimate each year, and that shows a slight decrease in population for Mendocino County. The other information I've seen is the American Community Survey, their 5-year data ending in 2019. That they tabulate data down to the block group level, that's census geography. It's a subtract level, although they're still rather large areas. And some of those block groups show a decline in population. However, I would caution about putting too much into that, because the American Community Survey is really designed for areas that have much more population than we do. And when you look at the error factor for some of those survey data, it's a pretty large factor, 30 to 40% error rate. So it may be that some areas of our county show a decrease in population where others show a slight increase. But those numbers are pretty sketchy at this point.
Okay, thank you. Supervisor McGordy?
A question for Leaf. So the last time that we did redistricting, I know there was public input, but in the end, how did the process go? What were the final determining factors and how the maps were drawn?
Well, there wasn't a lot of change to be made. The population figures did not, there's always one district that's going to grow faster or slower, and you can never really determine, which it's always been a surprise. However, the disparity was not that great. So there wasn't really a lot of change that was necessary. And when the Citizens Committee took public input from around the county, I think the vast majority of people said they liked it the way it was. So they came up with two proposals. One was a drastic change from what we've had in the past. This is the Citizens Committee. And the other was only a slight variation. In the end, the board actually adopted boundaries that had even a more minuscule change, just enough to balance the population. So in the end, the board really did not pick either option from the Citizens Committee. Basically crafted their own version of that.
Well, this kind of goes back to my issue of why do we have citizens advisory committees if we don't listen to them? And I you know, want to be certain if we commit to that we're actually listening as the process goes through.
Okay, do we have any public comment on this agenda item?
Yes, we have one voicemail.
My name is Paula Cohen. I reside in the 5th District and want to speak to Mendocino County's redistricting agenda, item 5C. I've already sent an email, but wanted to just put this in vocal terms. I am a member of the local League of Women Voters and was chair of the Mendocino County Complete Count Committee, and well understand the frustrating delays in the census count, leading to a truncated timeline. While I understand the short turnaround for production of maps, the intent of the legislation was to encourage community input in this process. I believe a county-led process would not encourage or result in greater participation. Instead, I would encourage a community members to help educate and promote the importance of this process. The local personal approach proved very effective in increasing participation in the majority of Mendocino County's 23 census tracts in the 2020 census. Bottom line, this is a community process. It is in the county's best interest to ensure transparency and to include community members. Thank you for your time and your consideration. Paula Cohen.
And that concludes public comment.
Okay. Do we have any final questions or comments? Okay, Supervisor Mulhern.
Thank you, Chair. I was concerned when we first heard this item about not having enough input, and I continue to be concerned, especially if 2 members would indicate a quorum. And I realize we're talking about a very small advisory board, but that just seems like not enough people to be making these decisions.
I agree with you 100%, just for the record.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Go ahead.
I think I had mentioned the possibility of a smaller quorum to Mr. Duncliffe. The one thing I do want to just highlight is because we're going to have a fair number of meetings within a pretty short period of time. A lot of our boards and commissions struggle with obtaining a quorum and getting a meeting date that will have enough people here. So you could certainly go with a larger number. I would just note there is a risk that if you end up missing that December 15th deadline because you're not able to get enough people or enough meetings in that time frame, you may end up losing jurisdiction, and it may be a court that ultimately ends up drawing the new boundaries.
On that point, Christian, I believe the existing executive order from the governor allows for the Zoom meetings basically through, is it the end of August or the end of September? And in which case it seems like most of these public meetings would take place at least through a hybrid system of Zoom and in-person meetings, which I would think would make it easier to guarantee a quorum.
So that may be the case. I'd say I don't know that we know exactly what's going to be happening with COVID later in the year and what exactly the orders will be like at that point. I would just note we seem to have challenges even in the Zoom world with getting a quorum for some of our bodies.
Okay.
And I'd also say that just might be something the board members may want to take into account in sort of selecting people for this assignment, is to make sure they really understand the importance of meeting and have the ability to make themselves available.
Okay, thanks. Supervisor Hashak.
Thank you, Chair Judy. So if we had each supervisor select one person and had a quorum of 3, that seems like the most appropriate. And I think that there is certainly interest out there for people to be involved in this process, that the people who want to be involved in this process will show up. And if they can do it Zoom, so much the better. So I would recommend, or I'll move that we have an advisory committee with 1 representative from each supervisorial district.
I would second clarification with a minimum quorum of 3.
Correct.
Okay. All right. We've got a motion on the table. Any comments on the motion? Supervisor McGordy?
So they get together and they make the recommendations, and how binding are the recommendations? Do the supervisors still have final say over what's going to happen?
Chair Jarity, Charlotte Scott, Assistant County Counsel, would you like me to respond?
Sure, go ahead.
With the advisory model, the board still retains ultimate authority on the final decision, on the final map. Obviously, the board in seeking an advisory model would take into consideration the input from the advisory committee, advisory commission, but ultimately the decision would be up to the board, and those recommendations are not binding, they are advisory.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions about the motion? Okay, can we have a roll call?
Supervisor Hashak?
Yes.
Supervisor Williams?
Yes.
Gertie?
Yes.
Supervisor McGordy?
Yes.
Supervisor Mulhern?
Yes.
Motion carries unanimously.
Okay. Well, I think it goes without saying that we are inviting members of the public to contact us as soon as possible so we can make the appointments as quickly as possible so this committee can begin meeting. Any other comments by board members? Thank you. Supervisor McGordy?
So it would be really helpful too if we had some sort of a standard application so that we can compare qualifications for people who want to serve. Staff could help us with that. It would be really useful.
Well, yeah, so I think, well, I guess that's a question for staff. Would we be using the existing application form that we have for other committees, or would it be changed in some way?
Steve Dunnicliff, Deputy CEO. I would anticipate that, especially because we're going to try to get this out as quickly as possible, that we're going to try to rely on existing applications. But certainly we can, try to make sure that it will work for this application. It seems to me like one of the primary questions that may be of interest is just trying to confirm an applicant's ability to prioritize, meetings related to this with the short schedule.
And how many meetings, Steve, do you think are going to be necessary?
So there will be, I believe, 4 meetings in front of the board as a requirement, but that doesn't include any additional workshops that or even just organizational meetings that the advisory committee would have on its own. So to an extent, that's undetermined, but I would think that there's going to be at least 6 meetings in addition to the 4 board meetings.
And the people we appoint should be from our district, would you say?
If I may, through the chair, what we had discussed is relying on sort of recommendations from each supervisor, but not necessarily from within the supervisorial district. And county council can chime in if they feel the need. But the concern here was that because we're talking about a redistricting process, if we're tying representatives to existing districts, it's just trying to look at this a little bit more neutrally. And so if each supervisor has a recommendation for an appointee that the full board would endorse, I don't know that if that appointee would have to be within their district. And the county council, do you have any need to weigh in?
Charlotte Scott, Assistant County Counsel through the chair. There is no requirement that any appointee or nominated person be from the supervisor's district. The criteria, there isn't criteria that requires that. And I think it certainly makes sense to have members in the commission who are interested in being on the commission, and so not necessarily tying it to each district. I don't think that would be a requirement, and it's really up to the board.
Thank you. Supervisor Hatchak, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Judy. If on the application that we could put down what the meeting requirements will be, such as the 6 you just laid out, so that people are really informed and they're kind of buying into that, that commitment. I think that would be helpful.
Okay, thank you. Supervisor Williams.
Is there any problem appointing somebody who is not in my district but wants to be?
Chair Jardy, Charlotte Scott, Assistant County Counsel, if I may. There is no requirement that any supervisor recommend or nominate someone from within their district.
Okay, Supervisor McGordy, do you have your hand raised?
Yes, so I just wanted to say that if it's not on the application, at least maybe a memo that describes what they're committing to, go with the two interested people so that they can find out as part of the application process what they're going to be expected to do. And then the application can be separate. It'll be our standard application, but I think it's really important that people be informed up front what they're committing to.
Good points. Okay, so hopefully staff could include that kind of information, even if it's a supplemental memo to the standard application process. All right, well, it is 4:38, and I think with that we are adjourned for our meeting tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. See you then.